Close your eyes and forget everything you think you know about Earth. Now, imagine standing in Morocco not today, but 300,000 years ago. The wind is hot, the stars unfamiliar, and at a single waterhole, 7 different species of humans have gathered. All in the same moment. One has eyes like burning coals. Another barely reaches your waist. Towering shadows drift in from the east. You don't belong here, and yet you do. Because one of them is us. But here's the twist. We were the weakest. No claws, no fangs. No thick skulls or muscle-bound bodies. We had no right to survive. Yet every other species at that waterhole is now extinct. Except us. Why? That question takes us on a journey not just through time, but through extinction events, vanished giants, and survival strategies more shocking than fiction. This isn't a story about dominance. It's a story about desperation, adaptation, and a kind of genius born from failure. This is not your history textbook. This is the story of how Homo sapiens became the last human standing. If you're already hooked, trust me, it only gets wilder. Tap that like button so more curious minds can discover this. Subscribe if you're into stories that rewrite everything we thought we knew about our species. And hey, if this blows your mind, share it with someone who still thinks cavemen were just dumb brutes. Let's set the record straight, together. Close your eyes. Now open them, but not here. You're not in the 21st century anymore. You're in Jebel Irhoud, Morocco, 300,000 years ago. The night air is thick with the scent of mud, fur, and ancient heat. Crickets chirp in languages long extinct. And in front of you, something impossible is happening. Something that has never happened before and will never happen again. 7 species of human beings, all gathered around a single waterhole. Not in theory, not in myth, this is real. They're here together, and they're all thirsty. Not just for water, but for survival. You might not recognize them as human at first glance. One group, burly, pale-skinned. Eyes alert like wolves' moves, with the swagger of something that knows it's at the top of the food chain. These are the Neanderthals. Their muscles ripple beneath thick hides. Their eyes reflect firelight like predators, not prey. Their skulls are enormous, their faces hard, their walk confident. They've ruled the European continent for over 200,000 years. This water holds theirs, or so they think. From the east come the strangers, slender, tall, silent. They move like shadows made flesh, watching, calculating. The Denisovans, though no one here calls them that. Their name won't be known for another 299,700 years. But they carry the breath of the high Himalayas in their blood, secrets of survival, locked in genes that will one day let modern Tibetans live where others suffocate. Right now, they want one thing: water. The air grows tense. The Neanderthals stare across the flickering flame. These strangers aren't like them. They are taller, more wiry. Alien, but the Denisovans aren't the only anomaly. From the south trudges the old blood, Homo erectus. These are the veterans of Earth's evolutionary battlefield. 1.7 million years of survival echo in every step they take. Their faces are flat, their brows heavy, their eyes deep-set and ancient. Their tools are simple, their speech is uncertain. Yet no one dares mock them. Even the Neanderthals shift slightly when they approach. These are the elders, the survivors of ice, of fire, of extinction events that erased countless others. But there's more. A rustle in the underbrush reveals beings that shouldn't exist. Homo naledi, barely 4 feet tall. Brains no bigger than a chimp's, and yet they carry tools crafted with disturbing precision. Their hands are dexterous, their movements efficient. Evolutionary theory says they shouldn't be here, shouldn't have survived. Yet here they are, defying every rule written by modern science. To the north, out of darkness, trudges Homo heidelbergensis. The ancestors? broad, brutish, mysterious. Looking at them is like peering into a warped mirror, your great-grandfather's great-grandfather's shadow. They gave rise to both Neanderthals and us. Their gait is steady, their tools primitive but lethal. You feel something stir in your DNA just watching them. And then, the smallest ones arrive. From the island forests of what will one day be called Indonesia, Homo floresiensis steps lightly through the crowd. The hobbits, as future scientists will cruelly nickname them. Barely 3.5 feet tall, but with eyes sharp and ancient. Their world was filled with miniature elephants and dragons, and they hunted both with tiny spears and terrifying accuracy. Don't let their size fool you. These beings survived where giants perished. And finally, trailing at the rear, trembling slightly, comes a group that looks strangely familiar. Homo sapiens, us. No bulging muscles, no towering height, no intimidating teeth or claws. Our ancestors arrive at the waterhole with wide eyes, fragile frames, and bubble-shaped skulls. Compared to the others, we're unimpressive, pitiful even. No one notices when we crouch to drink, no one feels threatened, and that is our greatest advantage. Because while the others see with eyes, we see with imagination. A Neanderthal watches the stars and sees pinpricks of light. A Denisovan sees the horizon and plans his next move. But a Homo sapiens stares at the sky and wonders what lies beyond it. We are the only ones drawing patterns in the dirt. The only ones whispering to one another not just about food or water, but about what might come tomorrow. Ideas, beliefs, dreams. That's our secret weapon. We could convince others to die for ideas that don't exist. Gods, spirits, ancestors, futures. That invisible force culture will become the most powerful evolutionary tool in history. But none of that is visible tonight. Tonight, the waterhole is still. Only the soft sound of careful sipping breaks the silence. The 7 species glance at one another warily. No one knows this moment is special. No one realizes that this gathering will never happen again. Only one creature watches with full awareness. In the darkness beyond the firelight, golden eyes blink. Smilodon fatalis saber-toothed cat waits in silence, muscles coiled, teeth gleaming like ivory daggers. It doesn't care who these apes are. To it, they are all meat. But even it notices something strange. Only one species looks up at the stars. Only one draws in the mud. Only one seems distracted by thought. The cat doesn't understand what it's seeing, but we do. It's watching the future. By dawn, the species will scatter. The Neanderthals will return to their mountain fortresses. The Denisovans will vanish into the east. Homo erectus will continue walking, always walking, into legend. The hobbits will retreat into forests, too small for giants. And Homo naledi will return to their caves, their secrets buried in stone. In 50,000 years, 6 of these species will be gone. Only we will remain. And even we won't know what happened here. But the fossils will remember. The tools, the DNA. The stars, perhaps. For this moment, this impossible, flickering, silent communion was not just a meeting. It was a prophecy. A rainbow of humanity gathered around one pond, beneath alien stars, each carrying a different answer to the same question. How do we survive? For Homo sapiens, the answer was never about strength. It was about the mind, about imagination, about stories. We weren't the strongest. We weren't the smartest, but we were the most contagious. Our words spread faster than fire. Our myths crossed mountains. Our mistakes became inventions. And from this fragile beginning, from this silent sip of muddy water at Jebel Irhoud, began the greatest takeover the planet has ever seen. By the time we finish the job, mammoths will vanish. Sabers will fall. Cave lions will go silent. The sky will carry metal birds and the oceans will churn beneath plastic. But it all began here, at a waterhole, under forgotten stars. with the weakest ape ever born whispering to another, "What if?" In the dry, sun-baked hills of Morocco, where the wind whispers through jagged stone and the earth remembers things long forgotten, a discovery was made that would challenge everything we thought we knew about ourselves. Jebel-Irhoud, once just another sleepy dig site, erupted into global headlines in 2017 when archaeologists unearthed something astonishing: the fossilized remains of early Homo sapiens dating back nearly 300,000 years. That's older than any other known Homo sapiens fossil by over 100,000 years. It was like finding a birth certificate we didn't know existed, one that rewrote the origin story of our entire species. Before Jebel-Irhoud, the oldest confirmed Homo sapiens came from East Africa. But this find, far to the northwest, told a different tale. It whispered that we did not simply spring to life in one tidy location, but instead emerged across the continent, in a mosaic of populations, each contributing threads to the human tapestry. The skulls found at Jebel-Irhoud were striking. They bore features both familiar and strange: a modern-looking face with flat cheeks and small teeth, yet crowned with an elongated, archaic brain case. It was as if humanity was mid-metamorphosis, caught halfway between what we were and what we would become. These were not primitive brutes, as once imagined. They made tools, sharp, symmetrical stone points, crafted with precision. They cooked their food, likely shared it. They lived in groups, raised children, buried their dead. These weren't just bones. They were stories pressed into the dirt for 300 millennia, now rising like ghosts to remind us that our origins aren't linear, they're layered. We didn't arrive fully formed, but emerged gradually, in waves, from different regions across Africa. Jebel-Irhoud is proof that modern humanity didn't have a birthplace. We had a birth continent. What's truly haunting about Jebel-Irhoud isn't just its age, but its silence. No written records, no language preserved. Just stone tools and fragments of skulls. And yet, through those fragments, we hear echoes. Echoes of children laughing, of fires crackling at night, of hands shaping tools by lamplight made of stars. This site forces us to let go of the idea that early humans were crude or simple. In reality, they were innovators, survivors, people, and perhaps they looked up at the same moon, felt the same wind, dreamed the same dreams. They walked a world teeming with predators, climate swings, and unforgiving tyranny they endured. Every one of us carries a flicker of them in our DNA. Not metaphorically, literally. Their blood is in our veins. The ghosts of Jebel-Irhoud never really vanished. They walked into the future through us. Jebel-Irhoud challenges the old textbook version of human evolution, the tidy timeline that placed our origin in East Africa around 200,000 years ago. But now, archaeologists and geneticists must contend with a more complicated and beautiful truth: that Homo sapiens evolved not from a single cradle of humanity, but from scattered populations across Africa that were mixing, moving, and adapting over hundreds of thousands of years. It wasn't a tree with a single trunk, it was a braided river, branching, merging, diverging. Jebel-Irhoud is just one of many channels in that ancient current. And as we unearth more fossils from places like Ethiopia, South Africa, and Kenya, the picture grows richer. Not only did we originate in Africa, but we were more diverse than we ever imagined. Different groups, different tools, different environments, but all distinctly human. We weren't born in a single moment. We unfolded. What makes this discovery even more profound is its timing. Around 300,000 years ago, Earth was going through immense environmental change. Shifting climates, megafauna migrations, droughts, and floods. It was a planet in flux. And the humans at Jebel-Irhoud weren't just surviving this chaos, they were adapting to it. Their tools evolved, their diets shifted, their brains expanded, not just in size, but in complexity. This wasn't accidental. It was evolution in real time, sculpted by fire and famine, trial and error. These early humans didn't wait for the world to become comfortable. They learned to read the land, to track animals, to shape their world through effort and ingenuity. They were proto-engineers, early philosophers, and storytellers. If their stories weren't written down, and somehow, their survival sparked a chain reaction that would eventually give rise to language, art, civilization, and you. Long before we crowned ourselves rulers of Earth, before skyscrapers etched the sky and satellites kissed the stars, we were prey. Not metaphorically, not philosophically, but literally. Our ancestors were weak, slow, and vulnerable. They knew it. Because all around them walked beasts that made nightmares look gentle. Creatures so massive, so efficient, so horrifying, that surviving them wasn't just luck. It was a tactical miracle. 300,000 years ago, Earth wasn't just home to humans. It was home to monsters. Start in North America. Picture a bear, not a grizzly, not a brown bear, but a short-faced predator standing 11 feet tall on its hind legs, weighing nearly 3,000 pounds. The ground shook when it walked. Oh, yeah. This wasn't some lumbering brute. Arctata simus, the short-faced bear, was an evolutionary weapon. It had longer legs than any bear alive, allowing it to run over 40 miles per hour across open plains. Its skull was engineered for bone crushing, with a bite strong enough to shatter femurs. But the most terrifying part? Intelligence. This bear remembered. It mapped water sources across hundreds of miles. It knew migration patterns, could wait in ambush still as death until the moment struck. Modern bears use brute strength. Arctatus used strategy. The first humans to cross into North America didn't read paleontology textbooks. They didn't need to. They read the land, the bones, the claw marks. They carved their terror into cave walls. One painting shows a bear towering over a mammoth, surrounded by tiny human figures like ants, not battling, fleeing. They'd seen what happened when one of them made a mistake. A fossil track in New Mexico tells the story in silence. A woman carrying a child moves across muddy ground. Her stride grows longer, faster, more desperate. Behind her, the bear's prints appear offset by ours, but clearly following. She knew. That kind of knowing burns into your species. And then there's Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat. Hollywood loves to imagine them roaring and leaping. Its reality was colder, more surgical. Their 7-inch teeth were thin, brittle, easily broken if used recklessly. But that's the thing, they weren't used recklessly. Smilodon's jaws opened 120 degrees, nearly straight vertical. That range wasn't for show, allowed the cat to place its sabers precisely like scalpels, directly into a prey's throat. But Smilodon didn't hunt alone. Fossil records from Rancho La Brea show something astonishing. Healed injuries, shattered legs, crushed hips, sabers that should have meant death. Yet the animals lived. They'd been fed, protected, cared for. These were not solo killers. These were packs families. One Smilodon with a shattered pelvis lived for years after its injury. It couldn't walk, let alone hunt. But it was well fed, never starved. Think about that. While our ancestors were still arguing over how to rub two sticks together. A species of giant feline had already developed long-term health care. We weren't alone in our social evolution. We weren't even first. And then, lurking through the forests of Asia, there was Gigantopithecus, the real King Kong, 10 feet tall, 600 kilograms of herbivorous power. Picture a gorilla crossed with a bear, then double it. Their jaws could crush bamboo like celery. Their presence alone reshaped ecosystems. Nothing hunted Gigantopithecus, not even tigers dared. And yet, they vanished. Around the same time Homo erectus began spreading through Asia, Gigantopithecus began to disappear. Coincidence? Maybe. But the bones tell a darker possibility. Gigantopithecus didn't go out with a roar. It faded. Its forests disappeared. Bamboo became unreliable. And Homo erectus, smaller, weaker, but adaptable, moved in. We didn't fight Gigantopithecus. We took its food, its land, its home. We were termites, not titans. And termites always win. In Europe, the terror wore a different face. Panthera spilea, the cave lion, the largest cat to ever live. Bigger than any lion today, longer legs, more powerful jaws. But what made them haunting wasn't just size, it was preference. Their teeth weren't worn from crushing mammoth bones. They were sharp, pristine, used on softer prey. Like us, human bones with cave lion bite marks have been found from Germany to Croatia. One track in France follows human prints perfectly, step for step, for over 200 meters. Then the human begins to run. The lion sprints. The human prints vanish. Just disturbed earth. A silent scream written in soil. Cave lions weren't loud. They didn't roar. They stalked. They observed, and they hunted human-sized targets. They also owned the real estate. We didn't just compete with them for prey, we competed for shelter. Caves weren't empty homes, they were dens. Sometimes lion, sometimes human, sometimes both. The layers in caves tell of back and forth occupation. Lions, then humans, then lions again. Every cave we claimed was a war won. Every fire we built was a defiance against a king. Go further back, and you meet the giant ground sloth Megalonyx. 15 feet tall, claws like size. Herbivores, yes, but not harmless. They could disembowel a predator with a single swing. But the fossil record shows something almost cinematic. In White Sands, New Mexico, ancient footprints reveal a scene of horror in slow motion. A giant sloth realizes it's being hunted. It circles, it rears. It slashes at invisible enemies. And then, inside its turning radius, small human footprints. Calm, deliberate. This wasn't a fight. It was an execution. We weren't strong enough to win a brawl. So we outlasted, outpaced, outthought. We bled the sloth out with tiny cuts, always staying just out of reach. Always watching, always waiting. When it collapsed, someone crawled beneath its neck and drove a spear into the only soft spot at the base of its skull. That wasn't courage. That was desperation polished into genius. In the frozen north, the mammoth ruled. Majestic, wise, and deadly. But unlike the others, mammoths weren't just powerful, they were social. The matriarch remembered every waterhole, every winter path, every danger. She passed that memory down. Herds moved in formation, protected their young, lived like empires. And we studied them. Early humans didn't just hunt mammoths, they hunted mammoth behavior. They learned when males went rogue, when matriarchs grew cautious, when migrations shifted. They drove them toward cliffs, funneled them into traps. Shattered their empires with the same force that would one day shatter cities. Strategy. But that strategy came at a cost. Because every mammoth we killed, every bear we outplanned, every lion we displaced, it didn't just mean survival. It meant removal. It meant extinction. We weren't just fighting monsters, we were ending them. Not all at once. Not in epic battles, but step by step. Fire by fire. Idea by idea. Until one day, there were no more monsters, just us. And maybe that's the most haunting part of this story. Because the monsters weren't villains, they were competitors. Creatures as ancient and adapted as us. They played their evolutionary cards with strength, size, speed. We played ours with failure, with thinking, with talking. And somehow, that beat everything else. The last cave lion died in Alaska 14,000 years ago. The last mammoth on Wrangel Island around 4,000 years ago. Bears shrunk. Sloths vanished. Sabers fell silent. Even the shadows seem smaller now. But echoes remain. Tribal legends across the Americas still speak of giant bears, of cats with knives for teeth, of hairy ones who walked like men but weren't. We tell ourselves they're myths, But myths are just memories too old for calendars. Maybe they remember the time before we ruled. Maybe we do. And maybe, when we dream of monsters clawed, fanged, terrible, we're not dreaming of fantasy. We're dreaming of the world as it was. When we were prey. When survival meant thinking faster than death. When monsters were real. And they were magnificent. If you judged early Homo sapiens by appearance alone, you'd have bet against them. In fact, if the Ice Age world had hosted an evolutionary draft, our species wouldn't have been picked last. We wouldn't have been picked at all. We were the cosmic joke of the human family. Not just physically unimpressive, we were fragile, awkward, underpowered, and embarrassingly vulnerable. Standing next to a Neanderthal, our ancestors looked like someone had tried to build a human out of spare parts and then ran out of budget halfway through. Our bones were thin. Not just in comparison, but by absolute standards. A Homo sapiens skull from Jebel-Irhoud, held under the right light, appears translucent in places. Where Neanderthal skulls could take a blow from a club and shrug it off, ours would crack under a strong handshake. Muscle attachments on early sapiens bones are pitiful. A Neanderthal's arm bone looks like it belongs to a silverback gorilla. A sapiens humerus, more like a scrawny teenager who skipped gym class. Even our teeth were disappointing. Neanderthals had powerful jaws, equipped to crush bone and tear sinew. Heidelbergenses had molars that could grind through roots and bark. Our teeth, small, weak. The kind of teeth you'd find on a herbivore's bad day. We couldn't chew tough meat. In fact, we had to cook food just to digest it without breaking our jaws. That's not innovation. That's necessity. And necessity, as history proves over and over, is the mother of evolution. We were naked too, literally. While other hominins were draped in thick body hair natural armor against the cold, we were born into a world of ice and wind with nothing but skin. Neanderthals had wide nasal cavities to warm frozen air. We had short, flat noses that offered no such protection. They could smell prey miles away, could barely smell smoke in a burning forest. Their vision was sharp, tuned to low light and fast motion. Ours was average at best. Floresiensis had better hearing than we did. Homo erectus had better endurance. Even our gait, the way we walked, was inefficient. Ask a biomechanic. They'll tell you our knees and lower backs are marvels of bad engineering. Every measurable traits, speed, sensory ability, cold resistance put us at a disadvantage. In a prehistoric Olympic Games, Homo sapiens wouldn't have qualified for the trials. And yet, here we are. We're the last humans standing. So how does a species built like a mistake become the most dominant force this planet has ever seen? The answer begins with failure. At archaeological sites like Jebel-Irhoud and Omo Kibish, scientists have uncovered what can only be described as humanity's first junkyards. Not piles of efficient tools, piles of attempts. Broken spearheads, awkwardly flaked blades, burned bones, cracked stones, failed hafting experiments. Other species refined one good tool and stuck with it for millennia. Sapiens, we failed. Constantly and learned from every mistake. Imagine a child drawing the same picture over and over, each version slightly different, slightly better. That was us. Our ancestors didn't perfect tools. They iterated them. They experimented recklessly. While Neanderthals were making stone points with surgical precision, sapiens were duct-taping innovations together with spit and desperation. And slowly, that triolander mindset birthed something unprecedented. A culture of innovation. We didn't have strength, so we invented strategy. We didn't have claws, so we made knives. We couldn't throw spears hard enough to kill, so we developed the Atlatla spear thrower that multiplies force. That one invention alone turned a weak arm into a lethal weapon. Our teeth couldn't chew raw meat, so we mastered fire, cooking meals to unlock calories and soften food. Our hairless skin was vulnerable, so we crafted clothing, weaving plant fibers and animal hides into portable microclimates. Every disadvantage we had became a prompt. Every flaw, a question. Every limitation, a challenge. And we answered those challenges not as individuals, but as networks. That may have been our greatest edge. Neanderthals lived in small, tight-knit groups, 10 to 20 individuals. They cared deeply for one another, yes, but their social circles were limited. Sapiens, we built webs. Groups of 100, then 200, then tribes that stretched over hundreds of miles. We created alliances, exchanged goods, shared knowledge across distances no other species could manage. A stone blade designed in Ethiopia shows up thousands of miles away in South Africa, passed hand to hand, generation to generation. Not just the tool, but the idea of the tool. That's not evolution by genetics. That's evolution by culture. Our ancestors didn't need to be strong if they could call on 50 people. Didn't need to be fast if they could coordinate a trap. Didn't need to know everything because someone in the group did. We outsourced memory, delegated tasks, shared resources. It wasn't just survival of the fittest, anymore it was survival of the most connected. That connectivity laid the groundwork for something else. Language. Now every hominin could communicate in some way. Gestures, grunts, maybe a few basic vocalizations. But sapiens, we developed syntax. We spoke in pictures. We painted scenes in each other's minds. And that ability to share not just facts, but stories was revolutionary. With stories, we didn't just say, "There's danger over that hill." We said, "A shadow came last night. It took my brother. It moved like smoke and had eyes like coals. Don't go near the trees." That story paints fear. It paints memory, builds culture. It creates belief, and belief changed everything. We began to believe in things that weren't real yet. Gods, ancestors, the hunt tomorrow, the harvest next season. We could imagine outcomes, prepare for futures, die for ideas. Belief made us unpredictable. Belief made us powerful. And belief made us dangerous. Because now we weren't bound by what was true. We could act on what we believed was true. And sometimes terrifyingly, often that belief became reality. We believed we could make better tools, so we did. We believed the spirits of the dead watched us, so we buried them with gifts, creating the first forms of ritual. We believed we could move farther, faster, to better lands. We walked across deserts, ice sheets, mountains, and oceans. A species of 98-pound weaklings decided the world wasn't big enough, and then we took it. But this rise came at a cost, because while we were innovating, imagining, connecting, we were also becoming something else. Lonely, as we spread, other human species vanished. One by one, the Neanderthals, our brawny cousins, the Denisovans, the ghosts of the East, the hobbits, those clever island survivors. They didn't all die in battle. Many simply couldn't keep up. Their strategies worked till they didn't. Until we showed up with our chaos and our stories and our alliances and our gods. We didn't defeat them with spears. We defeated them with change. Because we were never the best. We were just the most adaptable. When the Ice Age froze Europe, Neanderthals thrived. We nearly went extinct. But when the climate changed again and again and again, we changed too. They didn't. We didn't fit the world. So we reshaped it. We burned forests. We built fires. We hunted mammoths, not because we had to, but because we could. And with every adaptation, we stepped farther from nature and closer to domination. We rewrote the rules. And once we started, we never stopped. Today, we stand on skyscrapers made of steel and light. We fly machines through the air. We communicate at the speed of electrons, crack atoms, clone life. But the blueprint for all of this everything was written by those fragile people from Jebel Irhoud. Their bones are brittle, their tools are crude, their shelters were laughable, but their minds were storms. And from those storms came the future. We weren't born to win. We were born to break. To break rules, to break patterns, to break expectations. And in that breaking, we found our shape. Not the strongest, not the smartest, but the strangest. The humans who failed their way to the top of the food chain, to species that rewrote evolution's story, to ones who were quite literally born to lose. Forget the stereotypes. Wipe away the museum mannequins with hunched backs and vacant stares. Erase the cartoons of club-swinging brutes grunting around fires. The Neanderthals were not dumb cavemen. They were not evolutionary dedens. They were not, as we've long believed, primitive knockoffs of us. The truth is much more humbling. For over 200,000 years, Neanderthals ruled Europe with a kind of quiet supremacy. They were the apex predators of their world, efficient, intelligent, and astonishingly sophisticated. If Earth had an Ice Age empire, it belonged to them. And by the time Homo sapiens tiptoed into the continent 45,000 years ago, the Neanderthals had already built something extraordinary. Start with their bodies. Neanderthals were biological fortresses. Shorter than us, yes, but built like tanks. Their bones were thick and dense, designed to absorb punishment and deliver it right back. Their muscle attachment points reveal strength that boggles the mind. Biceps capable of curling twice a modern man's body weight. Grip strength that could crush a human hand during a casual handshake. One Neanderthal humerus from Shenadar Cave is thicker than a baseball bat. And that wasn't unusual. That was average. Their brains were larger than ours. Let that sink in. On average, a Neanderthal's brain was around 1,750 cubic. centimeter. It's about 10% bigger than the modern human brain. Not swollen randomly, but distributed in ways that favored spatial reasoning, visual processing, and body coordination. These weren't simple brutes. These were intelligent, physically dominant apex hunters. And they weren't just strong, they were engineers. At sites like Bruniquel Cave in France, 176,000 years ago, Neanderthals ventured 300 feet into pitch-black underground caverns. There, they constructed circular structures from broken stalagmites. These rings served no obvious survival function. They weren't for shelter. They weren't for cooking. They were something else. Possibly symbolic. Possibly ritual. We don't know for sure. But we do know this. You don't build monuments in total darkness unless you have mastery over fire and a purpose beyond survival. Fire wasn't new to them. They controlled it with precision. They made birch pitch, a natural glue used for hafting tools, by burning bark in oxygen-free environments. That process requires temperature control and chemical knowledge. Even modern tinkerers struggle to replicate. Some of their stone points were resharpened over 17 times, indicating not just efficiency, but care. These tools weren't disposable. They were maintained. Passed down, cherished. Their technology was so advanced that archaeologists had to reevaluate what was possible before Homo sapiens entered the scene. The Lavalo technique, a stone flaking method so complex it requires mentally visualizing the final tool inside a chunk of raw rock, was their kindergarten. They shaped stone like Michelangelo carved marble. But even all that doesn't capture their most important quality: community. At Shenadar Cave in Iraq, archaeologists found the remains of a Neanderthal man who had been severely injured, missing an arm, partially blind, likely unable to hunt or fend for himself. But he didn't die alone. He lived for years after his injury. Someone fed him, cleaned him, protected him. Around his body were pollens from wildflowers, suggesting he was buried with care, with ritual, with a sense of meaning. This wasn't a fluke. At multiple sites, we see signs of healing broken bones that mended injuries that would have been fatal without aid. This means something simple but profound. Neanderthals took care of each other. They practiced health care. They valued the lives of the weak, the old, the injured. They didn't abandon their burdens. They carried them, and they likely did more than that. Evidence of symbolic behavior keeps surfacing. Necklaces made from eagle talons, pigments possibly used as body paint, perforated shells, decorated cave walls. For years, scientists dismissed these as flukes or imitation. But the dates are clear. Some Neanderthal art predates Homo sapiens' arrival in Europe by over 20,000 years. In Spanish caves, hand stencils dated to 66,000 years ago. Our earliest known cave art were made by Neanderthals. Abstract patterns appear on cave walls, scratched into stone. Are they calendars, maps, poetry? We may never decode their meanings, but we know what they signify. The need for beauty, for expression, for a voice that echoes in silence. They buried their dead. They mourned. They remembered. That's not brutish. That's deeply human. But even empires fall. The Neanderthals had spent millennia perfecting a way of life. Close-range hunting, small, stable groups, a deep understanding of their environment. Their territories were vast and meticulously memorized. Isotope analysis of their teeth shows seasonal migration patterns. Some moved hundreds of miles annually. Others never strayed more than a few kilometers from their birthplace. They were locals everywhere they lived, and they were fearless. They didn't hunt from a distance. They got close, too close. Modern rodeo riders have similar injury patterns: broken ribs, shattered limbs, cranial trauma. Neanderthals weren't afraid to tackle mammoths head-on. Their skeletons bear the scars of this bravery. But bravery becomes stubbornness when the world shifts. Around 45,000 years ago, the climate began to change again. Europe warmed. Prey became scarce. Forests fragmented. Old patterns broke. And into this shifting world stepped something new. Something strange, us. At first, Homo sapiens were insignificant. We arrived in small bands, lacking the physical strength, the knowledge of the terrain, the refined tools. Our camps were laughable compared to Neanderthal shelters. Our tools were crude knockoffs. Our fire barely warmed the dark. But we didn't fight fair. We didn't get close. We stayed back. We brought distance. Sapiens invented the otlot-leveraged spears that killed from 50 yards. Later, the bow would revolutionize everything. But even before that, our hunting strategies were different. We ambushed, we coordinated. We ran our prey to exhaustion. We attacked with math, not muscle. And we watched, we copied, we adapted. Late Neanderthal sites show signs of experimentation, trying to mimic sapiens' tools, even making beads and ornaments. But it was too late. Their empire, built on physical dominance and environmental mastery, couldn't adjust fast enough. They weren't wiped out by war. They were outcomputed by change. We took their caves, their prey, their water. We brought diseases their immune systems had never seen. We mated with them. Yes, every non-African alive today carries about 2% Neanderthal DNA. But we also replaced them, slowly, relentlessly, without mercy. Even if we didn't mean to. The last known Neanderthal population huddled in Gibraltar 40,000 years ago. From their caves, they could see Africa across the water, the birthplace of the invaders. Maybe they watched the stars. Maybe they told stories of a world that was slipping away. One of their skeletons shows signs of starvation, stress, collapse. The empire had crumbled, but its legacy remained. In our genes, in our memories, in the shadows of every cave. We remember them in ways we don't fully understand. Maybe that's why the idea of the caveman persists. Why we dress children like Neanderthals for Halloween. Why we cast them as thugs in movies. We're mocking them, yes, but we're also haunted by them. Because part of us knows we didn't win because we were better. We won because we were different. They had strength. We had speed. They had endurance. We had flexibility. They had mastery. We had madness. And madness in a changing world is a kind of genius. Neanderthals were not failed humans. They were another kind of success story, one that ended not in disgrace, but in tragedy. The tragedy of being too specialized in a world that rewards chaos. The tragedy of building a cathedral in a forest that's about to burn. They weren't dumb. They weren't doomed. They were just us, written in another font. And now they live in our blood. When you lift something heavy, when you navigate a dark path with uncanny ease, when you feel the urge to protect the weak or paint your skin or bury your dead, that's them, echoing through you. The Neanderthal Empire didn't vanish. It was absorbed. It endures. And it remembers. Imagine stumbling across the bones of a human ancestor so strange, so small, and so unexpected that it forced the scientific world to pause and ask, how much do we really know about our own past? That's exactly what happened in 2003, when archaeologists digging deep inside Liang Bua cave on the island of Flores in Indonesia unearthed the partial skeleton of a tiny hominin. She was about 3 feet 6 inches tall. Her brain was smaller than a chimpanzee's. She walked upright. She made stone tools. And she wasn't a child. Meet Homo floresiens, nicknamed the Hobbit. The discovery sent shockwaves through anthropology. Here was a being that looked almost mythical, dwarfed, primitive, and yet unmistakably human. She had long arms, short legs, and a shrunken skull, but she lived only 50,000 years ago, at a time when modern humans had already colonized much of the globe. She may have met Homo sapiens face. Surface and survived longer than others. But who were these hobbits, really? To understand them, you have to understand the island that shaped them. Flores isn't your average tropical paradise. It's isolated, mountainous, carved by ancient volcanoes, and haunted by steep cliffs. Getting there, especially tens of thousands of years ago, required crossing open ocean. And that's the first mystery. How did Homo floresiensis, or its ancestors, even arrive? One theory holds that they descended from Homo erectus, our tall, tool-using ancestor, who once spread across Asia like wildfire. Somehow, perhaps during a storm or a migration gone wrong, a group of erectus made it to Flores. And then something extraordinary happened. They shrank. This process, called island dwarfism, is well documented in biology. On islands, large species often evolve to become smaller over generations, especially if resources are scarce and predators are few. Elephants become pygmy elephants. Big lizards shrink. And in this case, the human ancestor became a hobbit. But shrinking isn't just about size, it's about strategy. On Flores, being big wasn't an advantage. The jungle was thick, the food limited. A smaller body needed fewer calories, could slip through dense forest, and survive on less. Over thousands of years, evolution sculpted a new species, tough and wildly resourceful. The fossils tell us that Homo floresiensis lived on the island for over 100,000 years. They hunted dwarf elephants called stegodon. They cracked animal bones to suck out marrow. They made advanced stone tools, sharper, more symmetrical, and more varied than expected for their brain size. And that's another shock. Their brains were tiny. Around 400 cubic centimeters, roughly the size of a grapefruit. That's smaller than a modern chimp. And yet, they crafted weapons, controlled fire, and organized hunts. Some archaeologists believe they even built small hearths inside their caves. How is that possible? Because brain structure matters more than size. It turns out that Homo floresiensis had unique brain features, expanded frontal and temporal lobes, that may have supported higher-level thinking. Their brains were small, but possibly more efficient than they seemed. The Hobbit wasn't just clever for its size, may have been clever, period. And then, they vanished. Around 50,000 years ago, the fossils stop. No more bones, no more tools, just silence. What happened? One possibility. We happened. There's growing evidence that modern Homo sapiens arrived on Flores around that time. If we did, we would have brought fire, new hunting strategies, and perhaps most devastatingly disease. Everywhere we went, species disappeared. Mammoths, giant sloths, cave lions, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and maybe the hobbits. But maybe not. Because the villagers of Flores don't think the hobbits are gone. They tell stories unchained, whispered stories of small people who live deep in the forest. The Ibu-Gogo, hairy, long-armed, fast-moving, capable of speech, but incomprehensible. They steal food, mimic voices, disappear when chased. Some say they died out a century ago. Others say they're still there, hiding. Myth. Maybe. But remember, until 2003, science thought the hobbits were a myth too. Langbua Cave was just the beginning. Since then, other nearby islands, Sulawesi, Luzonhov, yielded more surprises. In 2019, another small-bodied hominin was discovered on Luzon, called Homo luzonensis. They, too, had strange combinations of ancient and modern traits. It's starting to look like Southeast Asia wasn't a human backwater. It was a hotspot, a melting pot of diverse human species, evolving in isolation, shaping their own destinies. And yet, we know so little. We don't have hobbit DNA. The tropical heat has destroyed any ancient genomes, so we can't say for sure how closely related they are to us. We don't know if they could speak, if they had culture, if they buried their dead, if they sang songs under the stars, or left with bones, tools, and the echo of possibility. But here's what we do know. Homo floresiensis was not a mistake, not a devolved species, not a malformed offshoot. They were adapted, tailored by evolution to their island. Clever, capable, mysterious. Survivors. And in a way, they challenge everything we think we know about being human. Because for most of history, we've equated intelligence with size, with height, with brain mass. But the hobbits defied that. They remind us that nature doesn't care about our metrics. That survival is about fit, not flair. That wisdom can come in small packages hidden in the dark, laughing at the tall ones who think they know everything. Their story is one of humility, a reminder that we are not the center of the narrative. We are just one branch of a tangled tree. And for a long time, we weren't even the most interesting one. Somewhere in the mountains of Flores, the wind still rushes through the mouth of Langbua. The jungle creeps forward. The bones sleep. But the questions remain. Were they the last of their kind? Did they meet us? Did they fear us? Or did they watch us pass, unseen, unknown, waiting for the moment to return? Because stories don't die. Not really. And sometimes, if you listen closely in the dark, you can still hear the hobbits breathing. Imagine stumbling across the bones of a human ancestor so strange, so small, and so unexpected that it forced the scientific world to pause and ask, how much do we really know about our own past? That's exactly what happened in 2003, when archaeologists digging deep inside Langbua Cave on the island of Flores in Indonesia unearthed the partial skeleton of a tiny hominin. She was about 3 feet 6 inches tall. Her brain was smaller than a chimpanzee's. She walked upright. She made stone tools. And she wasn't a child. Meet Homo floresiens, nicknamed the Hobbit. The discovery sent shockwaves through anthropology. Here was a being that looked almost mythical, dwarfed, primitive, and yet unmistakably human. She had long arms, short legs, and a shrunken skull, but she lived only 50,000 years ago, at a time when modern humans had already colonized much of the globe. She may have met Homo sapiens face. Surface and survived longer than others. But who were these hobbits, really? To understand them, you have to understand the island that shaped them. Flores isn't your average tropical paradise. It's isolated, mountainous, carved by ancient volcanoes, and haunted by steep cliffs. Getting there, especially tens of thousands of years ago, required crossing open ocean. And that's the first mystery: how did Homo floresiensis, or its ancestors, even arrive? One theory holds that they descended from Homo erectus, or tall, Tuleosing ancestor, who once spread across Asia like wildfire. Somehow, perhaps during a storm or a migration gone wrong, a group of erectus made it to Flores. And then something extraordinary happened. They shrank. This process, called island dwarfism, is well documented in biology. On islands, large species often evolve to become smaller over generations, especially if resources are scarce and predators are few. Elephants become pygmy elephants. Big lizards shrink. And in this case, the human ancestor became a hobbit. But shrinking isn't just about size, it's about strategy. On Flores, being big wasn't an advantage. The jungle was thick, the food limited. A smaller body needed fewer calories, could slip through dense forest, and survive on less. Over thousands of years, evolution sculpted a new species, tough and wildly resourceful. The fossils tell us that Homo floresiensis lived on the island for over 100,000 years. They hunted dwarf elephants called stegodon. They cracked animal bones to suck out marrow. They made advanced stone tools, sharper, more symmetrical, and more varied than expected for their brain size. And that's another shock. Their brains were tiny. Around 400 cubic centimeters, roughly the size of a grapefruit. That's smaller than a modern chimp. And yet, they crafted weapons, controlled fire, and organized hunts. Some archaeologists believe they even built small hearths inside their caves. How is that possible? Because brain structure matters more than size. It turns out that Homo floresiensis had unique brain features, expanded frontal and temporal lobes, that may have supported higher-level thinking. Their brains were small, but possibly more efficient than they seemed. The hobbit wasn't just clever for its size, may have been clever, period. And then they vanished. Around 50,000 years ago, the fossils stop. No more bones, no more tools, just silence. What happened? One possibility. We happened. There's growing evidence that modern Homo sapiens arrived on Flores around that time. If we did, we would have brought fire, new hunting strategies, and perhaps most devastatingly disease. Everywhere we went, species disappeared. Mammoths, giant sloths, cave lions, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and maybe the hobbits. But maybe not. Because the villagers of Flores don't think the hobbits are gone. They tell stories, enchained, whispered stories of small people who lived deep in the forest. The Ibu Gogo, hairy, long-armed, fast-moving, capable of speech, but incomprehensible. They steal food, mimic voices, disappear when chased. Some say they died out a century ago. Others say they're still there, hiding. Myth? Maybe. But remember, until 2003, science thought the hobbits were a myth too. Lang Bue Cave was just the beginning. Since then, other nearby islands, Sulawesi, Luzon have yielded more surprises. In 2019, another small-bodied hominin was discovered on Luzon called Homo luzonensis. They, too, had strange combinations of ancient and modern traits. It's starting to look like Southeast Asia wasn't a human backwater. It was a hotspot, a melting pot of diverse human species, evolving in isolation, shaping their own destinies. And yet, we know so little. We don't have hobbit DNA. The tropical heat has destroyed any ancient genomes, so we can't say for sure how closely related they are to us. We don't know if they could speak, if they had culture, if they buried their dead, if they sang songs under the stars. We're left with bones, tools, and the echo of possibility. But here's what we do know. Homo floresiensis was not a mistake, not a devolved species, not a malformed offshoot. They were adapted, tailored by evolution to their island. Clever, capable, mysterious. Survivors, and in a way, they challenge everything we think we know about being human. Because for most of history, we've equated intelligence with size, with height, with brain mass. But the hobbits defied that. They remind us that nature doesn't care about our metrics. That survival is about fit, not flair. That wisdom can come in small packages, hidden in the dark, laughing at the tall ones who think they know everything. Their story is one of humility. A reminder that we are not the center of the narrative. We are just one branch of a tangled tree. And for a long time, we weren't even the most interesting one. Somewhere in the mountains of Flores, the wind still rushes through the mouth of Liang Bua. The jungle creeps forward. The bones sleep. But the questions remain. Were they the last of their kind? Did they meet us? Did they fear us? Or did they watch us pass, unseen, unknown, waiting for the moment to return? Because stories don't die. Not really. And sometimes, if you listen closely in the dark, you can still hear the hobbits breathing. Before humans ruled the earth, a giant walked among the trees. Towering nearly 10 feet tall, weighing over 1,000 pounds, and moving with the slow, deliberate grace of an old king Gigantopithecus. Blackie was the largest ape to ever live. Picture a creature that looked like a gorilla crossed with a grizzly bear, except bigger, stronger, and entirely at home in the dense bamboo jungles of southern Asia. It lived for almost 2 million years. Then, around 300,000 years ago, it vanished. No one remembers the last one. No burial site, no fossils frozen in place, no cave paintings to mark the end. Just silence. And the slow fade of thunderous footsteps into legend. Today, we know only fragments. A few massive jawbones, a scattering of molars, and decades of speculation. But what we do know paints a picture of Trageia gentle giant, undone not by violence, but by change. And maybe, just maybe, by us. Gigantopithecus was likely a vegetarian. Its teeth broad, flat, worn suggest a diet of roots, fruits, and bamboo. Some scientists call it a forest vacuum, a beast designed to sweep the jungle floor clean. Its enormous size wasn't about predation, it was about endurance. With a slow metabolism and enormous strength, it could go days without food, moving steadily through its domain like a shadow with weight. But that size was also its greatest weakness. Big animals need big habitats and big food supplies. As the Pleistocene climate began to shift, the dense tropical forests of Southeast Asia began to shrink. Open grasslands replaced closed canopies. Dry seasons lengthened. The bamboo thinned, and Gigantopithecus did not adapt. Unlike smaller primates, it couldn't leap between treetops or retreat into caves or store fat efficiently. It couldn't travel long distances in search of new territory. It had become a creature of a very specific world, and when that world changed, it didn't. This is a recurring theme in evolutionary history. But there's another layer to the mystery. Because around the same time Gigantopithecus disappears from the fossil record, early Homo erectus appears in the region. Now, Homo erectus wasn't us, but it was our ancestor and a game changer. Tall, tool-using, fire-wielding, and above all mobile. Homo erectus was the first of our lineage to leave Africa and conquer vast swaths of Asia, and when they arrived in Southeast Asia, they didn't just walk, they disrupted. They hunted small animals, cut down forests, spread fires, and they competed. Gigantopithecus, for all its size, probably avoided confrontation. Its massive bulk would have made it slow, predictable, and easy to track. And even if Homo erectus didn't kill it directly, they may have outcompeted it eating its food, disturbing its range, turning its forest into something unfamiliar. This theory is controversial. We don't have direct evidence of confrontation. No bones with tool marks. No spears stuck in rib cages. But extinction doesn't always come with a roar. Sometimes it comes with a slow suffocation. A tree cut here, a fire there. A troop of humans passing through and leaving behind a trail of disrupted silence. Gigantopithecus simply couldn't keep up, and so it vanished. Not with a bang, but with a long, drawn-out sigh. To this day, no one knows exactly where or when the last one died. But we do know this: the Earth once held many human-sized apes. Gigantopithecus was the largest, but it wasn't alone. And now, they're all gone. Only we remain. Why does this matter? 'Cause Gigantopithecus is a cautionary tale. It shows us that strength doesn't equal survival. That size can be a curse. That evolution rewards not the most powerful, but the most flexible. It also forces us to reconsider our role. We tend to think of extinction as something that happened to animals. Climate change, meteor impacts, natural selection. But as early humans spread, so did disappearance. Species that had thrived for millions of years began to vanish suspiciously close to wherever our ancestors set foot. Gigantopithecus may have been the first such casualty. But it wouldn't be the last. There's something haunting about that. Because when we picture ourselves at the top of the food chain, we imagine conquest, victory, the spoils of intelligence. But what if our legacy isn't built on triumph, but on the quiet collapse of those who couldn't survive our presence? What if we didn't rise because we were chosen, but because we were the last ones left? Gigantopithecus reminds us that nature doesn't play favorites. That giants fall. That forests vanish. That what seems eternal is always one season away from change. And yet, there's still something deeply beautiful in the memory. Imagine it: a morning mist in an ancient jungle, bamboo creaking in the wind, and through the fog, a massive silhouette moving slowly, silently, brushing leaves aside like curtains. Gigantopithecus didn't need fire, or weapons, or tools. It simply was present, powerful, alive. Its death wasn't a failure. It was a chapter, and we are the readers. We are the ones left to tell the story, to remember the gentle giants, to wonder what the world might have looked like if we had shared it instead of replaced it. Maybe that's our burden, to carry the memory of those we never knew, to feel the weight of vanished footsteps, and to walk lightly, because we were not the first, and we won't be the last. In the dim light of an ice age morning, when the world was colder and the air was thin, a massive predator stalked the tundra. Its muscles rippled with primal energy as it padded silently through the snow, the crunch of its paws muffled by the soft drift of powder. Smilodon, the infamous saber-toothed cat, was the undisputed ruler of its domain, a master of stealth and strength. But Smilodon wasn't just any big cat. It wasn't just a hunter. It was a hunter of hunters, the king of a food chain where power, speed, and skill combined into a single, terrifying predator. Smilodon was built differently from the big cats we know today: lions, tigers, and leopards. It had shorter limbs and a stocky build, a body built for strength rather than speed. Its most notable feature: its long, curved, canine saber-like teeth that could grow up to 8 inches long, like knives carved from bone and sharpened by centuries of evolutionary refinement. But those teeth, though iconic, weren't the only reason Smilodon was feared across the plains. What set it apart was its hunting style. Unlike modern big cats that rely on speed to chase down their prey, Smilodon used its strength to take down animals much larger than itself. It hunted with precision, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When it did, its bite was a decisive, deadly force, aimed at the neck or throat, delivering a fatal blow with surgical accuracy. The massive teeth, despite their fragility, were designed not for tearing flesh, but for delivering a quick, clean kill. Smilodon's bite would slice through the jugular or spinal cord, effectively immobilizing prey within seconds. And yet, Smilodon wasn't invincible. Like every apex predator, it had its own set of vulnerabilities. Its stocky, muscular body made it a slow runner compared to modern predators. It couldn't chase down prey at the speed of a cheetah or a lion. Instead, Smilodon relied on ambush tactics, sneaking up on its prey, until it was close enough to launch a lightning-fast attack. It had to get close, very close. And when that approach failed, it would sometimes miss its target entirely, an error that could cost it its life. But in its prime, Smilodon thrived. Its territory stretched across the Americas, from North America all the way down to South America. Its victims ranged from small, fleet-footed animals to towering mammoths, its sharp teeth finding their mark in the necks and throats of giant creatures. At the height of its reign, Smilodon would have moved across vast plains, silently and efficiently hunting its prey, its eyes sharp, its body prepared for the attack. Yet, despite its mastery of survival, there was an ominous shadow that hung over Smilodon's existence. It didn't know it, but the days of dominance were numbered. The same forces that had allowed it to rise to power, its ability to take down megafauna and rule the landscape, were about to become the very things that would lead to its downfall. The world was changing. The climate was shifting, bringing unpredictable weather patterns that would force species to adapt or perish. The Ice Age was coming to an end, and the environment that Smilodon had ruled for thousands of years was starting to break down. Grasslands shrank and forests grew, changing the habitat of the megafauna that Smilodon depended on for food. The giant animals it had preyed on, mammoths, bison, and giant ground sloths, were also being affected by the climate change. Their numbers began to dwindle, and the environment became less predictable. The food chain was being disrupted, and the once mighty predator had fewer and fewer places to hunt. At the same time, Smilodon's reliance on ambush hunting, while incredibly effective, began to prove to be a liability. The animals it hunted were becoming scarcer, and the predator's slow pace and heavy frame made it more difficult to catch the fast-moving prey it needed to survive. It had adapted to hunt megafauna, but what happens when the megafauna is no longer around? Smilodon could no longer take down the large herds of bison or mammoths with ease. It had to hunt smaller animals, but its large teeth and powerful body were not designed for hunting smaller prey. And as the available food became more scarce, Smilodon's options dwindled. Even more concerning was the arrival of Homo sapiens. As we know, humans were not physically suited to compete with the apex predators of the Ice Age. We were small, weak and fragile compared to the massive beasts that roamed the plains. But we had something else, something that Smilodon couldn't account for. Strategy. Homo sapiens used tools. They hunted in groups. They adapted quickly, learning how to track, trap, and outsmart their prey. With fire, weapons, and intelligence, humans could hunt much larger animals than themselves. And unlike Smilodon, humans didn't rely on strength alone. They could outlast, outthink, and outmaneuver. As Homo sapiens spread across the Americas, they encountered Smilodon. And while the saber-toothed cats might have been able to overpower a single human, the numbers were against them. Humans hunted in groups, and over time, they began to decimate the megafauna that Smilodon depended on. Not only did they compete for food, but they also likely hunted the same animals that Smilodon relied on for sustenance. In the harsh environment of a changing world, Smilodon couldn't adapt quickly enough. Its specialized hunting style was no longer effective, and its population began to decline. The last known Smilodon roamed the Earth around 10,000 years ago. But the signs of their demise were already evident thousands of years before that. The megafauna they relied on had started to disappear, their food sources shrinking, and their territory being encroached upon by humans and other predators. The final blow came not from the massive creatures Smilodon had once ruled over, but from the slow extinction of the very ecosystem that had supported it. As humans spread across the Americas and climate change took its toll, Smilodon and its kin were left behind, victims of a world that had moved on without them. For millions of years, Smilodon had been the undisputed king of the Ice Age. But in the end, it was not outmuscled or overpowered. It was outpaced by change. By the end of the Ice Age, the world Smilodon had known the one where its saber-like teeth, where the pinnacle of evolution was no longer there. The mighty predator, once so unstoppable, was reduced to a memory, a fossil. a reminder of the delicate balance of nature and the price of specialization in a rapidly changing world. Smilodon, the great saber-toothed cat, is no longer a fearsome predator of the wild. It is a legend, a part of the fossil record, a reminder of the extraordinary beasts that once ruled the earth, but couldn't survive the very changes they had shaped. The last hunt of the saber-toothed cat was not a dramatic chase through the snow, nor a mighty battle between predator and prey. It was a quiet extinction, born of climate change, competition, and the relentless forward march of time. Smilodon didn't just vanish, dissolved into the ancient landscape. Its legacy marked not by bones scattered across the earth, but by a deep, haunting silence that echoes in the gaps between our knowledge, and perhaps in the stillness of the Ice Age plains. There's one last echo of a mighty predator who, like so many others, couldn't outrun the inevitable tide of change. Long before the story of lions became one of African savannas and safari photographs, they ruled a very different world, one of snow, ice, and shadow. These were not the golden-maned kings we know today. These were Pantherospelea, the Ice Age cave, lions of Europe and Eurasia. Bigger, bolder, and in many ways more mysterious than any lion alive today. They were apex predators in a frozen land, feared by all who roamed it, man and beast alike. The cave lion wasn't just a larger cousin of the African lion. It was a creature perfectly sculpted for the Ice Age. Males may have lacked manes altogether, an adaptation for thermoregulation in the cold, and their bodies were built for stalking prey across snowy tundras and dense conifer forests. Up to 10% larger than modern lions, they weighed nearly 800 pounds. With long muscular limbs and chests like drawn bows ready to explode into motion. Their range stretched across Europe and deep into Asia, from the Iberian Peninsula all the way to Siberia. These were the lions that watched glaciers creep and mammoths shiver. They shared the land with saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, massive hyenas, and something far more dangerous. As something far more dangerous, sapiens feared cave lions. And for good reason. To stumble into one unarmed was a death sentence. But we also admired them. Across Paleolithic caves from France to Russia, we painted them, etched their forms onto rock walls by torchlight. In the Chauvet cave of southern France over 30,000 years ago, artists captured them with remarkable detail. Muscles rippling under fur, heads bowed in the hunt, eyes like smoldering coals. One of the few animals shown in profile, in movement, in interaction. This wasn't casual sketching. It was reverence. To early humans, cave lions weren't just beasts. They were gods, warriors, symbols of chaos and strength. And yet, despite their power, they were vulnerable to the same creeping fate that claimed so many Ice Age titans. Their story is one of glory, conflict, and a slow, inevitable fall. The prey of cave lions was massive. Reindeer, elk, musk, oxen, even young mammoths and rhinoceroses. But like Smilodon, their dominance relied on big game. And when the climate began to shift, when warming periods shattered the icy plains into fragmented forests and unpredictable terrain, their hunting grounds started to collapse. Worse, they weren't alone anymore. As Homo sapiens moved deeper into Europe and Asia, we brought something far more dangerous than weapons: strategy. Humans didn't just hunt prey, we hunted competitors. We tracked predators, learned their patterns, stole their kills, and drove them from their dens. We didn't face cave lions in direct battle. We wore them down over generations, the way the wind wears down stone. And yet, there's evidence we respected them even as we feared them. A pendant made of cave lion teeth was found in a 40,000-year-old burial site. In a cave in Germany, a ritual object fashioned from lion bones was buried near what may have been a shaman's remains. This wasn't just fashion, it was symbolic. Owning part of a lioness, especially a cave lion, was like carrying the spirit of the storm. But that didn't stop us from driving them into oblivion. The wars between humans and cave lions weren't fought like modern battles. They were slow-burning conflicts. Territory stolen acre by acre. Prey poached from under their noses. Cubs accidentally trampled or intentionally hunted. The landscape was changing, and we were better at changing with it. Lions adapted over millions of years. We adapted over breakfast. And as the mammoths and elk dwindled, so did the lions. Smaller prey couldn't sustain such massive bodies. Hunting became riskier. Den sites were disturbed, and the temperature ironically warmed. By 12,000 years ago, the cave lion was gone, and not just extinct, but erased. No frozen carcasses preserved in ice. No last known sighting, just a vanishing. Their bones remained scattered across the continent, but their presence, their majesty, was now only captured in flickering firelight paintings and faded memory. Still, echoes persist. In 2015, scientists discovered 2 perfectly preserved cave lion cubs in the Siberian permafrost. Frozen for over 12,000 years, they were tiny, their fur still intact, their paws curled as if asleep. They were nicknamed Yan and Dina, and for a brief moment, the world remembered what it had forgotten. They were not monsters. They were not myths. They were real. And they were infants, proof that even the fiercest predators began their lives in innocence. That's the tragedy of the cave lion. They weren't wiped out in some epic clash. They simply couldn't survive in a world shifting beneath their paws. A world where humans were multiplying, consuming, reshaping the planet to fit our image. We didn't kill them all with spears. We killed them with dominance. So what remains of them now? Their DNA still lingers in modern lions, faint and fragmented. Their bones sleep in museums. Their images haunt ancient walls. And their presence, wild, regal, terrifying, still fuels stories. Some even say they're not entirely gone. A few remote corners of Siberia, Canada, and Central Asia have generated whispered tales of massive cats, larger than any living lion, seen only in shadow, vanishing before they can be tracked. Science doesn't take them seriously. But part of us wants to believe. We want to believe the war wasn't total. That 1 or 2 might have escaped, surviving like ghosts in the deep frost, holding on to the old world just a little longer. Because when we painted them on cave walls, we weren't just depicting animals. We were saying, these are the ones who challenged us. And we remember them. And even now, in books, games, dreams, cave lions prowl. They remind us that before we tamed the world, we feared it. Before we conquered nature, we respected it. And before we stood alone, we shared this earth with giants who looked at us with amber eyes, not yet knowing they would lose. The war between man and beast didn't end with a roar. It ended with a whisper. A warm season too long, a kill too few, a den left empty, and a painting in a cave, marking not just their lives, but our guilt. The cave lions are gone, but their shadow is longer than their roar ever was. And if you listen in the silence of a deep forest where no fire burns and no tools gleam, you might still hear them breathing. Long before skyscrapers kissed the sky, before asphalt veins cut through continents, before cities teemed with millions of lives flickering in digital light, there was a different kind of city. One made not of steel, but of mud. Not of ambition, but of necessity. A place without money, without war, without kings or queens. And yet, it may have been the beating heart of the human story. Its name was Cataluk, and it rose not with fanfare, but with firelight and farming in the heart of what is now modern-day Turkey, nearly 9,000 years ago. At first glance, Cataluk looks nothing like the cities we know today. There were no roads, no plazas, no palaces or towers. Instead, it was a hive of homes, packed tightly together like cells in a honeycomb. Mud brick houses built side by side and stacked in layers, sprawled across the landscape with no streets to separate them. To enter your home, You climbed up a neighbor's roof and descended through a hole in the ceiling. The rooftops were the sidewalks. The city, if you could call it, that was a puzzle of humanity pressed shoulder to shoulder. And yet, despite its unfamiliar shape, this was a city. Maybe the first. Thousands of people lived here, not just passing through, not seasonal, permanent. They shared space, shared food, shared rituals. They raised children, buried their dead, painted their walls, crafted tools, worshipped gods. In every measurable sense, they had built something together. But why here? Why now? Cataluk emerged during a seismic shift in human history, the Neolithic Revolution. This was the moment when humans, after hundreds of thousands of years as nomadic hunter-gatherers, began to stay in one place. They grew crops, domesticated animals, built shelters that didn't move. For the first time, the land wasn't just something to pass over, was something to belong to. And Cataluk was born from that belonging. It sat on fertile soil near a river, surrounded by hills and rich wildlife, a perfect environment for early farming. People grew wheat and barley. They herded sheep and goats. They harvested obsidian from nearby volcanoes, volcanic glass sharp enough to cut flesh like a scalpel, valuable enough to trade across great distances. But Cataluk wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. Beside the homes built from mud brick, all roughly the same size, archaeologists have found murals, sculptures, and shrines. On the walls, leaping bulls, hunting scenes, geometric patterns, skim the corners, clay figurines of women, breasts and hips, exaggerated, likely goddesses of fertility. Beneath the floors, the bones of the dead, tucked lovingly into burial pits, curled like sleepers returning to the earth. People lived among their ancestors. Children were raised above the graves of grandparents. Meals were cooked feet away from the resting places of the dead. The boundaries between life and death, the sacred and the ordinary, were blurred. Every home was a tomb. Every tomb, a temple. This wasn't accidental. It speaks of a worldview foreign to us now, one where existence was layered, circular, intimate. Where the past was not buried and forgotten, but lived with. Where memory was woven into architecture. And perhaps most remarkably, there is no evidence of war, no city walls, no mass graves of violence, no signs of conquest or slavery. Cataluk existed for over 1,000 years, in eternity inhuman. Terms without the hallmarks of organized conflict. People disagreed, surely. There were likely arguments, rivalries, and tensions. But not war as we know it. Not the systematic, large-scale violence that later cities would master. How did they manage this? It's a question that still puzzles archaeologists. Maybe the lack of hierarchy helped. No royal tombs, no elite housing. Everyone lived more or less the same. Power, if it existed, wasn't carved in stone, it was negotiated in kitchens, whispered through generations. Leadership may have been communal, fluid, passed like bread from hand to hand. Or perhaps it was the intimacy of the place. Living so close, you couldn't afford to alienate your neighbor. They were your access point, your ladder, your rooftop street. In Cataluk, interdependence wasn't a choice, was survival. But this closeness had costs. Disease, for one. With humans and animals sharing space, hygiene was primitive. Bodies were buried inside homes. Ventilation was poor. Infections likely spread fast. Life expectancy was short. Infant mortality high, and yet they stayed. Because for the first time in human history, stability was possible. You didn't have to chase herds across the plains. You could plant. You could store. You could raise children who would sleep in the same bed you did. They would eat from the same bowl, walk the same rooftops. This was the promise of civilization, but also its seed of tragedy. Because once people settle once, they build homes and walls and ways of life, they begin to draw lines. Between inside and outside, us and them, native and stranger. Ownership becomes possible. So does exclusion. Eventually, those lines become borders, and borders become battlegrounds. Cataluke shows us the threshold, the moment just before that transformation, when humanity was trying to figure out what a city even was. What living together could mean without hierarchy, without conquest, without dominance, but it wouldn't last forever. Around 5700 BCE, Cataluke began to decline. The reasons remain debated. Climate change, soil exhaustion, disease, social collapse, or simply time itself. Over the years, homes were abandoned. The dense hive thinned. The rooftops grew cold. One by one, the fires went out. And yet, its legacy endured. Because after Cataluke, cities became something else. They became centers of power, of wealth, of inequality and empire. Jericho, Uruk, Babylon, these were cities of kings, of priests, of gates and armies. Cities with palaces and prisons. Cities with class and caste. But Cataluke was a city of equals, of artisans, farmers, mothers, fathers, and children, of the dead remembered in walls, of gods whispered in clay. It asked a question we're still answering. Can we live together without ruling over one another? It's tempting to romanticize it, to see Cataluke as a utopia lost. But that's not quite right. It was hard, dirty, fragile. Children died young. People aged fast. Food failed. Disputes flared. It was no paradise, but it was possible, and that makes all the difference. Because in a world where cities became symbols of hierarchy, Cataluke stood as a rare experiment in balance. It whispers across millennia, not with grandeur, but with grace, not with glory, but with humility. And maybe that's what makes it the first city, not the biggest, not the most powerful, but the one that dared to ask, what if we could live together? And no one had to lose. Today, its ruins are quiet. Just mounds of earth in a Turkish plain. But under those layers of dust are walls once painted with dreams, rooms once warmed by shared breath, lives that mattered, futures that were built brick by muddy brick. And if we listen carefully, beyond the hum of modern cities and the roar of empire, we can still hear the voices of Cataluke, asking us not to go back but to remember that once we built a city not to conquer the world, to belong to it. The Sahara Desert today is a vast sea of shifting sands, a barren wasteland of dunes that stretch for miles, interrupted only by the occasional rocky outcrop or the heat-miraged silhouette of a solitary camel. It's hard to imagine that, just 10,000 years ago, this arid landscape was a very different world. A world where rivers ran through the desert, where lakes sparkled under the sun, and where wildlife roamed freely among the grasses and trees. The Sahara was once a lush, green paradise, live with the rhythm of seasons, brimming with water and teeming with animals. And the humans who lived here, they were farmers. They raised cattle. They hunted wild animals. They built homes. They built civilizations. The story of the Sahara's transformation from verdant paradise to dusty desert is one of the most striking examples of environmental change on Earth. It's a story that challenges our understanding of climate, geography, and survival. How does an entire ecosystem change so drastically? What happened to the people who lived here? And could we, in the modern world, learn something about our own survival from their fate? Around 12,000 years ago, the Sahara was a lush, green environment. It had rivers, lakes, and fertile plains. The evidence is there in the ancient rock art, cave paintings, and fossilized remains of animals. Archaeologists have uncovered depictions of giraffes, crocodiles, and elephant species that today are only found in sub-Saharan Africa, far to the south of where the Sahara's northern edge lies today. The very rock formations and deep valleys of the desert hold remnants of ancient watercourses, now dry and cracked, but once flowing freely. But the change was slow, not immediate. Early humans, like those who lived in the Sahara during its green periods, would have been accustomed to a landscape full of possibilities. The people who lived here were not nomads. They were farmers, pastoralists, and fishermen. They could sustain themselves by planting crops, herding cattle, and fishing in the rivers that dotted the landscape. They knew how to navigate the seasonal cycles of a lush, fertile environment. The Sahara was not a place of struggle for survival. It was a thriving hub of human civilization, one of the many cradles of humanity's story. So, what happened? Why did this lush paradise, which seems so unlikely in today's image of the Sahara, transform into the desolate desert we recognize today? Around 8,000 years ago, something began to change. The once lush green Sahara began to dry up. And the transformation wasn't an instantaneous event unfolded over millennia. Researchers point to a slow, gradual shift in the Earth's orbit and axial tilt, which affected the region's monsoon cycles. These changes led to a decrease in the amount of rainfall that the Sahara received. The lush savannas and lakes started to shrink. Rivers that had once fed the land began to dry up. The once thriving lakes shrank into smaller, shallow ponds before vanishing entirely. At first, it was not an abrupt transformation. The process of desertification happened over thousands of years, and early human populations in the Sahara were able to adapt to the changes. As the rivers retreated and the climate shifted, humans adjusted by moving to more reliable water sources and adapting their agricultural practices to the changing environment. People could still live in this world, even as it became more difficult to sustain themselves. But as the environment continued to degrade, the people who lived here were forced to move. The Green Sahara slowly became an inhospitable place for both humans and animals. The vast plains and lakes that once sustained civilization slowly disappeared, and the desert expanded. One of the most extraordinary ways we know about the Sahara's past is through its rock art. Thousands of images and carvings have been discovered throughout the desert, left by the people who lived in the region during its greener days. These depictions show a world teeming with life animals like giraffes. Lions and crocodiles are all captured in vivid detail on ancient cave walls. In the Tassili Najjar Mountains of Algeria, more than 15,000 years ago, humans painted scenes of their daily life: fishing, herding cattle, and even dancing. These images serve as a direct link to the once thriving ecosystems that supported life in the Sahara. And they serve as a stark contrast to the dry, inhospitable desert that the region has become today. But these rock paintings also reveal something more profound: the awareness of change. As the climate shifted, the art began to depict increasingly arid landscapes. Creatures like the giraffes and crocodiles became less common, and scenes of water activities began to disappear. What the ancient artists may have been expressing through their work was the realization that their world was changing, that the once abundant wildlife and fertile lands were retreating. The rock art of the Sahara is one of the most poignant reminders of how dramatic the environmental transformation was. It's not just a cultural relic. It's a cry from the past, an echo of a world long lost, a world where the Sahara was green, and human civilizations thrived in what is now one of the harshest environments on Earth. The people who lived in the Sahara during its green periods were sophisticated and adaptive. They lived in a world rich with resources, and they understood their environment intimately. They built permanent settlements, raised cattle, cultivated crops, and fished in the rivers. The tools they used were advanced for their time, and they had a deep understanding of their environment, adapting their lifestyle to the seasonal rhythms of the land. But the most striking thing about the people of the Green Sahara is that they were able to navigate the shifting world around them with remarkable resilience. As the climate began to change, they adapted. They moved with the environment, following water sources and hunting grounds. They didn't just rely on their immediate environment, they were part of a larger, evolving story that spanned centuries. But no matter how adaptable they were, no one could stop the Sahara from drying up. As the environment became more and more hostile, these early inhabitants were forced to leave their homeland and find new places to settle. Some moved south, following the rivers that flowed into sub-Saharan Africa. Others migrated to the edges of the desert, where the climate was more favorable. By around 5,000 years ago, the Sahara had become largely uninhabitable for these early civilizations. What was once a vibrant green paradise was now a dry, empty expanse. People were forced to leave, and what remained was a vast, desolate desert. The legacy of the Green Sahara is hidden beneath the sand. Today, the Sahara is a symbol of desolation, a place where only the hardiest of creatures can survive. Yet, beneath the barren surface lies the memory of a lush, fertile land that supported human civilizations, animals, and plants. The people who lived in the Sahara's green days left behind more than just rock art and ruins. They left behind a profound lesson. Adaptability and resilience are key to surviving change. Just as the people of the Green Sahara adapted to their environment and adjusted to the shifting climate, we, too, face an era of change. The Earth's climate is warming again, and we must learn to adapt to navigate the challenges ahead, just as those ancient people did. The Green Sahara is gone, but its memory is not lost. It's preserved in the rock art, in the bones of animals, and in the legacy of those who once called the desert home. We can learn from them, not just how to survive, but how to thrive in a world that is always changing. The Sahara story is a reminder that even in the harshest of landscapes, life can flourish. But it's also a cautionary tale that no matter how vibrant the land, no matter how abundant the resources, change is inevitable. The Sahara was once green, and someday, perhaps, it could be again. Roughly 74,000 years ago, the Earth trembled. It wasn't just another earthquake or volcanic tremor. This was something different, something vast and apocalyptic. In what is now Lake Toba in northern Sumatra, a supervolcano erupted with a fury unmatched in human memory. It wasn't just an explosion. It was a detonation of the planet's crust, a wound torn open that would send ash clouds skyward and shake the very climate of Earth. And for a moment in time, humanity's survival hung by a thread. The Toba catastrophe is one of the most violent volcanic eruptions in the history of our species. When it erupted, it released an estimated 2,800 cubic kilometers of volcanic material, more than 1,000 times larger than the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption and nearly double that of the infamous Krakatoa blast. Ash rained down over continents. The skies darkened. For years, maybe even decades, sunlight was scarce and temperatures plummeted across the globe. Imagine that. An already cold planet thrust into an artificial winter. Crops where they existed failed, vegetation died off. Animal populations crashed. Rainfall patterns twisted into chaos. The Earth didn't just cool slightly. In some regions, the temperature dropped by 5 to 10 degrees Celsius. Glaciers expanded. Ice crept back into places it had once receded from. It was a global reset button, pressed violently by the Earth itself. And in the middle of it all were us. At the time of the eruption, Homo sapiens was still in its fragile early adolescence. We hadn't yet spread across the planet. We weren't dominant. We lived in scattered bands, some in Africa, others in parts of Asia. And yet, here was a catastrophe of global proportions, striking not just the planet, but the very timing of our development. For years, the Toba catastrophe theory held that this eruption almost wiped us out. Some scientists suggested that the aftermath of Toba may have reduced the global human population to as few as a few thousand individuals, a genetic bottleneck so narrow that every human alive today may descend from a very small group of survivors. If true, it would mean that every culture, every language, every genetic trait we carry was filtered through that one moment of survival. We were nearly extinguished. But did we really come that close? This question has sparked fierce debate in the scientific community. Genetic studies do suggest a population bottleneck occurred in humans around that time. Mitochondrial DNA shows evidence of a sudden reduction in diversity, hinting that our species might have been reduced to just a few isolated populations. Archaeological evidence in South Africa, particularly at sites like Pinnacle Point and Blombos Cave, suggests small bands of humans were huddled along coasts, surviving off shellfish, sealing themselves off from the hostile interior climate. These were not thriving metropolises. They were refuges. People lived in tight, isolated groups, perhaps sharing oral stories around fires while the skies remained gray and heavy with volcanic ash. The stars, for a time, may have been hidden. The sun, a dull smear in the heavens. And yet, we held on. But other studies have complicated this picture. Excavations in India where ash from Toba is still found in thick layers show continued presence of stone tools both before and after the eruption, suggesting that some human populations may have persisted with little disruption. Perhaps the catastrophe wasn't as uniformly deadly as once thought. Perhaps the impact was regionally devastating, but not globally apocalyptic. Still, regardless of the scale of human loss, what cannot be denied is the psychological magnitude of Toba. We are creatures of environment, of habit, of the skies and cycles. An eruption of this scale would have shattered the rhythm of life. Crops failed. Animals fled. Lakes dried. Rain stopped. Traditions may have collapsed. It was not just physical death, it was cultural death, followed by rebirth. In the shadow of the Toba winter, something strange happens in the human record. We get smarter, more creative, more communal. In South Africa, archaeologists have found shell beads, some of the earliest known pieces of human jewelry. They found tools with microlithic precision, signs of pigments being used for symbolic purposes. It's as though the trauma of Toba forced humans to innovate to become more human. Adversity, in this case, didn't just crush us. It shaped us. And there's something poetic about that. Because when the earth turned against us, when fire and ash blanketed the skies, we didn't disappear. We gathered closer. We adapted. We told stories. We carved, painted, adorned. We made meaning from the chaos. We looked into the void and said, "Not yet." Toba also reminds us of the sheer fragility of our dominance. Today, we build skyscrapers and satellites. We split atoms and edit genomes. But 74,000 years ago, a single volcanic blast nearly ended our story before it began. And even now, supervolcanoes haven't gone away. Yellowstone in the United States is one. Campi Flegrei in Italy is another. The planet still breathes fire. The Earth is not ours. It is only ours for now. We're lucky that Lake Toba today is calm. A serene blue body of water nestled in a crater that once belched death into the skies. Tourists come and take photos. Fishermen cast lines into its depths. But below that quiet surface lies the sleeping bee stand, the memory of a world reset by ash. What lessons does Toba offer us now? First, that nature is not tame. Climate is not fixed. Ecosystems, weather, seasons, they can change violently, unpredictably. We live in a moment of relative stability, but that stability is an illusion. Toba tore that illusion apart. It forced humans to reckon with their own smallness, their dependence on the Earth's good favor. Second, that survival isn't just about strength, it's about cooperation. The people who survived Toba likely did so by sticking together, pooling resources, telling stories, preserving knowledge. In the face of overwhelming darkness, it wasn't the lone hunter who survived, was the group, the fire circle, the tribe, and third, that trauma can seed transformation. It's no coincidence that some of the most sophisticated symbolic behavior appears shortly after Toba. Adversity didn't just test us, forged us. Perhaps the greatest volcano of all time was also the forge of modern humanity. So when we look up at cloudy skies or feel the rumble of distant thunder, we are echoing a deep ancestral memory. A time when the world itself darkened, and we asked whether we would see the light again. And we did. We adapted. We endured. We remembered. Because the Toba catastrophe wasn't just a natural disaster. It was the night we almost didn't wake up. Beneath the vast emptiness of the world's great deserts, where the sun scorches the land and the wind whispers through lifeless dunes, something astonishing lies buried: rivers. Not metaphorical rivers, real ones, ancient winding channels that once flowed with fresh water, teeming with life, now sealed beneath layers of sand and time. Forgotten by most, yet still echoing beneath the earth's crust like the ghosts of an Eden lost. These are not just geological curiosities, they are pieces of a hidden history, a record of climates and civilizations long vanished. Some of them are thousands of kilometers long, massive arteries of fresh water that once carved through what are now the driest places on Earth. Their discovery has shaken our understanding of deserts not as eternal wastelands, but as landscapes in flux, capable of rebirth, memory, and perhaps survival. Let us begin with one of the most dramatic examples, the Sahara. Today, the Sahara is the largest hot desert on Earth, a vast yellow sea covering over 9 million square kilometers across North Africa. It's inhospitable, seemingly eternal. But hidden below this lifeless skin lies a paleohydrological network of ancient river systems that once fed lakes, forests, and human settlements. Using satellite radar, scientists have traced the winding paths of fossil rivers, some stretching over 1,000 kilometers. One of the most significant is the so-called Tamanrasset River, an immense waterway believed to have once flowed from the Atlas Mountains in Algeria down toward the Atlantic Ocean. This river system would have rivaled the Nile in size. It carried rainwater from the highlands, cutting through the now-red heart of the desert, shaping ecosystems, feeding animals and humans alike. And it wasn't alone. Throughout the Sahara, beneath sand dunes as tall as buildings, lie the dried beds of dozens of rivers and lakes, lost veins of a greener earth. These rivers weren't myths. They shaped human migration. They created corridors of life. Early Homo sapiens likely followed these ancient rivers as they expanded across the continent. Rock art sites, buried tools, and the remains of settlements suggest these rivers served as lifelines during the so-called Green Sahara periods, when monsoon rains pushed farther north than they do today. But then the rains receded. The climate shifted. The rivers dried, the sand came, and the memory faded, yet their imprint never disappeared. In fact, some of these rivers still flow, deep underground fossil aquifers, holding water trapped for thousands, even millions of years. Libya's great man-made river project is based on tapping these buried water sources, channeling them across the desert to support agriculture and settlements. It's modern technology reaching back into ancient memory, plumbing the earth for whispers of a wetter time. And Libya isn't unique. In the Middle East, beneath the deserts of Saudi Arabia and Jordan, lie the traces of now-vanished rivers that once ran parallel to the great Euphrates and Tigris. Satellite imagery reveals ancient drainage basins, braided riverbeds, and shorelines of lakes that no longer exist. These were the arteries of a once-lush Arabia. Some researchers believe that these rivers may have provided the pathways for early human migrations out of Africa into the Levant and beyond. And then there's Australia, perhaps the most underestimated desert continent of all. The vast outback, red and cracked, seems eternally dry. But in recent decades, scientists using remote sensing have uncovered hidden paleochannels beneath the surface, evidence of megafloods and ancient river systems that once flowed across the land. Aboriginal stories, long dismissed by colonial historians as myth, speak of great rivers and inland seas. Now, science is catching up. These rivers shaped not only the terrain, but the oral histories of the continent's first peoples. The Thar Desert of India and Pakistan, too, conceals the bones of a lost river, the Saraswati. For centuries, Hindu texts spoke of this sacred river central to Vedic civilization, yet its location remained a mystery. But satellite images and archaeological digs have begun to reveal ancient channels that align strikingly with descriptions of the Saraswati. These findings suggest that before the Indus Valley civilization flourished, it may have grown along the banks of this now-vanished river. But why do these rivers matter? Because they are time capsules, windows into climates that once were and could be again. They remind us that deserts are not static. They breathe in millennia. They inhale lush epochs and exhale drought. They are not just symbols of scarcity, they are archives of change. For early humans, these rivers were not just water sources. They were highways. They connected communities. They offered food, shelter, and mobility. The entire map of human migration is etched along ancient watercourses. Where there was water, there was life. And where there was life, there was story etched into the rocks, buried in the sand, carried in DNA. Some of the most startling implications of these forgotten rivers are future-facing. As the global climate shifts again, we may need to turn to the past to survive. North Africa, Central Asia, even parts of South America, once vibrant green zones, are drying once more. But what if we could reawaken the ancient aquifers? What if buried rivers could be tapped sustainably? Used not to build empires, but to feed fragile populations in a heating world. Already, hydrologists and engineers are studying these ancient flows, using satellite data and radar to trace their paths. There's hope and warning. These aquifers are not infinite. They were filled in an age when rainfall was heavy and consistent. Today, they are non-renewable resources. Once emptied, they will not return. We can borrow from the past, but only for a while. There's a poetic tragedy here too. We build cities where rivers run, and when the rivers vanish, the cities vanish too. The desert is littered with ghost towns, not just of stone, but of memory. And yet, beneath the dunes, the rivers still whisper. They whisper of times when giraffes walked across what is now Libya, when hippos swam in Saharan pools, when fish markets thrived in the middle of Arabia, when the heart of Australia pulsed with rain. They whisper of a time when the desert was not death but abundance. And perhaps in the stories of these rivers we find something else: resilience. Because just as rivers dry, they also return. Not in years or decades, but in cycles of climate, in swings of the Earth's orbit, in shifts of atmosphere. And as the Sahara once bloomed, so might it again. Already, there are hints. In the last few decades, satellite imagery has shown regreening in parts of the Sahel, the southern edge of the Sahara. Grasses return, trees appear, rainfall patterns change. Some scientists even propose geoengineering the Sahara using buried water and afforestation to reverse desertification and fight climate change. It's ambitious, risky, but no longer absurd, because beneath the silence of sand lies memory. And memory, in time, becomes potential. We stand today at a strange threshold. The world we've known is shifting under our feet. Rain falls in places it shouldn't. Fires rage where forests once stood. Rivers dry, lakes shrink. But if we look down deep beneath the crust, we find guides, maps, ancient rivers waiting to be rediscovered. Not just for water, but for wisdom. The deserts are not empty. They are asleep. And in their sleep, they remember a time when they flowed, teemed, bloomed. We were there. And one day, we may be again. Imagine a land so vast, it stretched from the western coasts of France all the way to the eastern shores of Canada, unbroken. Icy expanse of grassland that dwarfed even today's largest ecosystems. A realm where snowstorms swept the plains, giant predators stalked herds in eternal twilight, and the most iconic creatures of the Ice Age roamed freely beneath the glimmer of ancient stars. This was the Mammoth Steppe, the largest biome the world has ever known, and perhaps one of its least understood. At its peak during the Pleistocene epoch, this megabiome stretched across Europe, northern Asia, Beringia, and into North America. And unlike the barren tundras of today, the Mammoth Steppe was rich, vibrant, and alive. It wasn't a frozen wasteland. It was a grassland paradise, cold but bursting with diversity. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, steppe bison, giant deer, cave bears, lions, wolves, and humans tiny, tenacious, and increasingly clever. But what made the mammoth steppe so unique was not just its size or inhabitants. It was how stable it was for tens of thousands of years. While glaciers advanced and retreated, while continents shifted their climate bands, the mammoth steppe endured, feeding animals and humans alike, maintaining a near-perfect balance of productivity and resilience. This was the supermarket of the Ice Age. But then, it vanished. And its disappearance is one of the greatest environmental mysteries in history. To understand the mammoth steppe, picture a cold yet fertile grassland. Low shrubs, hardy sedges, mosses, and thick grasses blanketed the terrain. These plants were deeply adapted to the cold and to grazing. Unlike modern tundra, which is low in biomass and diversity, the mammoth steppe could support massive herbivores year-round. Mammoths, in particular, thrived here. Their giant tusks and thick fur were perfectly adapted to the harsh climate. They were not wanderers of some desolate landscape. They were the keystone species of a cold Eden. Humans followed them. Our ancestors, Homo sapiens, and Neanderthals before them, used mammoths for everything. Meat, bones for shelters, hides for clothing, fat for fuel. Archaeological sites across Eurasia show mammoth bone dwellings, circles of tusks driven into the frozen earth, tools carved from ivory, and art-haunting cave paintings, etchings, and figurines that suggest a reverence for these animals bordering on the spiritual. But we weren't alone. The mammoth steppe was a theater of giants. Alongside the mammoths were predators that would make modern lions seem tame. Cave lions, nearly 10% larger than those in Africa today. Dire wolves, saber-tooths, short-faced bears. The competition was brutal. But the abundance of prey kept the ecosystem in check. Grass-fed herbivores, herbivores fed carnivores, and death returned nutrients to the soil. It was an elegant, violent harmony. Then something changed. Around 14,000 to 10,000 years ago, as the last ice age ended, the mammoth steppe began to fragment. The climate warmed, slowly at first, then more rapidly. The glaciers retreated, sea levels rose, and the permafrost frozen for millennia began to melt. What had once been vast, open plains turned into patchwork ecosystems. Forests crept in, wetlands spread. The grasses that once held everything together began to vanish. With the grass went the grazers. With the grazers went the predators. And with all of them went the mammoth steppe. But warming alone doesn't explain everything. Similar warming periods had come and gone before, and the steppe endured. What made this time different? One word: humans. As Homo sapiens spread across Eurasia and into the Americas, our numbers grew. We hunted more efficiently, more often. Our weapons improved. Our cooperation deepened. We could track and kill animals like mammoths, not just for survival, but for culture. We hunted in ways no other predator could, and the megafauna couldn't keep up. Their reproductive cycles were too slow, their ranges too disrupted. They were not just hunted, they were outpaced. And once their numbers dropped below a certain threshold, the ecosystem began to unravel. Because it wasn't just the loss of species, it was the loss of relationships. Mammoths were more than just animals. They were engineers of the steppe. Their constant grazing, trampling, and dung helped maintain the grassland itself. Without them, shrubs took over. Soils thawed faster, nutrients drained. The biome began to spiral into something else, something unfamiliar: modern tundra. The ecosystem that replaced the mammoth steppe is colder, wetter, less productive. It's not built for megafauna. It supports few grazers, few predators. The vibrant cycle broke. What was once a kingdom of giants is now a ghost of itself, haunting the high latitudes of our planet. And here's the question that lingers like a fog. Can we bring it back? In recent years, a bold idea has taken root among some scientists and environmentalists, an idea called Pleistocene rewilding. The concept is as radical as it sounds: to recreate as much as possible the ecosystems of the Ice Age. Not just to save species, but to restore functions. In places like Siberia's Pleistocene Park, researchers are already reintroducing species like musk, oxen, bison, and Yakutian horses to mimic the grazing impact of extinct megafauna. Why? Because grazing keeps the landscape open. It reflects sunlight. It helps maintain permafrost. In short, rebuilding the mammoth steppe could fight climate change. And then comes the more ambitious step: mammoths themselves. Using ancient DNA, scientists have already sequenced the genome of the woolly mammoth. Through CRISPR and other gene editing tools, they're working to insert mammoth traits into modern Asian elephants. The result? Not a clone, but a hybrida mammothant. Cold-resistant, woolly, and ideally able to roam the tundra as their ancestors did. To some, this sounds like science fiction. Quoi? It's ecological resurrection. Quoi? But even if we don't resurrect mammoths, the dream of the mammoth steppe endures because it offers something more than spectacle. It offers hope that we can reverse ecological collapse, that we can undo some of the damage we've done, that not all extinctions must be final, that ecosystems can be rewoven strand by strand. Of course, there are risks. Rewilding is complex. Ecosystems are intricate tapestries, not puzzles we can solve by plugging in missing pieces. But the mammoth steppe teaches us that large-scale systems can exist. That abundance is possible. That stability does not require modern technology, only requires balance. And maybe that's the final lesson. We look back at the mammoth steppe and see a lost world. But it was not lost because of a single event. It was lost because of accumulated disruptions, small changes that added up. Climate, hunting, soil, plants, everything is connected. And when too many links break, the chain falls. We live now in a time of breaking chains. But perhaps, if we remember the steppe, its expanse, its harmony, its glory, we can learn how to reconnect. The mammoth steppe wasn't just a biome. It was a way of life. A memory of a world where giants walked and grass whispered beneath snow. And in that memory, maybe, lies the blueprint for something greater than nostalgia. Maybe it's a future. It's one of the oldest stories ever told. A man and a woman in a garden, surrounded by rivers, animals, fruit, and peace until something changed. They disobeyed, and paradise was lost. The story of Eden has endured across faiths, cultures, and millennia. Not just because of its spiritual weight, but because it speaks to something primal within USA deep. Buried memory of a time when the world was more forgiving. But what if that story wasn't just myth? What if it was inspired by a real place? A place where the land was lush, the water plentiful, and life itself teemed with potential. Welcome to the Fertile Crescent, a crescent-shaped region that arcs from the eastern Mediterranean coast, through modern-day Iraq and Syria, and down toward the Persian Gulf. To historians and archaeologists, this is sacred ground, because of divine intervention, but because it's where human civilization truly began. Let's travel back nearly 12,000 years to the moment humanity first turned a corner from the long, harsh road of nomadic hunting and gathering. For hundreds of thousands of years, Homo sapiens had followed the seasons, chased herds, lived in temporary shelters, and held nothing but what they could carry. But here, in this extraordinary region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, something changed. People stayed. Why? Because the land gave them everything. The Fertile Crescent was a natural paradise: verdant valleys, seasonal flooding that replenished the soil, abundant wild grains, and a rich diversity of animals. Wheat and barley grew wild. Sheep, goats, and cattle began to tolerate human presence. Fig trees flourished. For the first time, Staying put wasn't a liability, was a survival strategy. This wasn't just good land. It was life-giving land. And it was here that our ancestors made the most radical gamble in human history. They gave up the security of mobility for the uncertainty of permanence. They began to farm. With farming came food surpluses. With surpluses came storage. With storage came settlements. And with those came the first stirrings of everything we now call civilization governments. Religion, writing, labor, social class. But let's not jump too far ahead. At first, these were small communities, modest in size, but monumental in meaning. Places like Jericho, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, or Göbekli Tepe, a site in modern-day Turkey that predates Stonehenge by thousands of years. It features enormous carved stone pillars arranged in circles, clearly meant for ritual. It was built before agriculture had fully taken root. These people weren't crude brutes stumbling into civilization. They were visionaries. They observed the stars, tracked the seasons, experimented with seeds. They domesticated not just plants, but themselves, forming rules, traditions, identities. The Garden of Eden, in this context, becomes less a myth and more a symbolic memory of human echo of a time when life was closely tied to the land, and we were part of nature rather than separate from it. But of course, every Eden has its fall. The Fertile Crescent was fertile, but it was also fragile. As farming became more widespread, people cleared more land. Trees were cut. Soil was tilled. Irrigation began to alter the natural flow of rivers. And with these changes came unintended consequences. Salinization, where salt accumulated in the soil. Crop yields dropped. Forests vanished. With scarcity came hierarchy. To manage irrigation canals and food supplies, communities needed organization leaders, scribes, rules. Inequality emerged. Some had more access to water and land than others. Power consolidated. Cities like Uruk and Ur rose, dazzling and dangerous. Writing was invented not to pen poetry or preserve myth, but to track taxes and grain. The original purpose of the written word was administration. Suddenly, the garden had guards and gates and kings. The Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians each built upon the bones of the last. Civilizations bloomed and crumbled like wheat in the sun. The fertile ground was both womb and grave. And yet, the memory of Eden lingered. Because there was a time when people lived in harmony with their environment, when the earth gave freely, when rivers flowed clean, when fruit hung low on the vine and no one ruled with an iron fist. Archaeological evidence from early Neolithic villages shows relative equalities, similar house sizes, shared resources, communal ovens. It wasn't a utopia, but it was cooperative. It was human scale, familiar, gentle. In time, the Bible's story of Eden would crystallize this nostalgia. A garden between rivers, a paradise lost through human choice. A moment when we were naked and unashamed, until knowledge and, perhaps, ambition drove us out. What if that story isn't just a warning, but a memory? Today, the Fertile Crescent is a region scarred by conflict and climate stress. Once green fields are now dust-blown. Rivers like the Tigris and Euphrates are shrinking due to overuse, damming, and drought. But beneath these modern crises lies an ancient echo, a voice that whispers of beginnings. And beginnings matter. Because understanding how and why we first formed settlements, why we shifted from gatherers to growers helps us understand what we are meant for. We are adaptable, yes, but we are also rooted creatures. We yearn for connection to land, to community, to cycles of nature that ground us. The Garden of Eden isn't just a place, it's a metaphor for a kind of life we instinctively recognize as right. One of balance, one of care. One where we walk in the cool of the evening and feel at home on the earth. It's easy to dismiss Eden as a story, but the geography matches. The rivers of Eden, the Tigris and Euphrates are real. The land flowing with milk and honey was real. The loss of paradise, real. We traded wild beauty for agriculture, then agriculture for empire, then empire for industry. And now, as climate change redraws the map once more, the question is, what comes next? Can we rediscover some of what we lost? Not by going backward, but by remembering forward. By learning from those first farmers. By honoring the land that fed us. By choosing again not knowledge over innocence, but wisdom over extraction. Maybe the real fall wasn't disobedience but forgetting. Forgetting the earth's rhythms. Forgetting our dependence. Forgetting that Eden was never ours to uneat, was ours to care for. But it's not gone. Because Eden, if it ever existed, wasn't destroyed. It was buried. Beneath layers of soil, of empire, of ambition. But if you dig deep enough in the Fertile Crescent, in the rock art of early farmers, in the DNA of wheat, you still find traces of that first garden. Still find the memory of a time when humans lived lightly, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. And that might be the most radical idea of all. Not that paradise was lost, but that it can be remembered. Long before cities hummed with machines or ships cut across oceans, before borders were drawn or flags were raised, there existed a different kind of people, free, untethered, yet deeply connected to the earth and sky. They left few buildings behind, no sprawling empires, no towering monuments to gods or kings. But they left something more profound, the memory of motion. These were the people of the wind nomads, pastoralists, and wanderers whose entire lives flowed with the seasons, the stars, and the shifting breath of the land. And their story is as essential to human history as any pharaoh or sultan or scribe. To understand the people of the wind, we must first abandon our modern bias, our idea that progress is measured by stillness, by cities, by fences, by permanence. Because for most of our species' existence, movement wasn't a failure to settle. It was a strategy, a way of being, a form of wisdom encoded not in books, but in footsteps. Nomadism, in many ways, was the original mode of life. From the earliest hunter-gatherer bands to later pastoral herders, mobility was the answer to survival. It was how we escaped drought, followed herds, avoided disease, and responded to the ever-shifting moods of the earth. To move was to adapt, and in the harshest places on Earth's steppes, deserts, tundra, it was the only way to thrive. The Eurasian steppe, for instance, was the cradle of some of the most famous nomadic cultures in history. The Scythians, the Huns, the Mongols. This vast grassland stretched from Hungary all the way to Manchuria's sea of waving grasses and wide skies. It could not support dense farming, but it could sustain herds of horses, sheep, goats, and cattle. And so the people who lived there became riders, herders, warriors. They carried their home shorts on their backs. They drank fermented mare's milk, read the clouds like books, and measured wealth in animals, not coins. Their power wasn't in walls or monuments, it was in motion. The Mongols, led by Genghis Khan, would go on to create the largest contiguous land empire in history, not from cities, but from saddles. Their cavalry moved faster than news could travel. They lived by rhythms the settled world didn't understand and sometimes feared. But the Mongols were just one expression of a much older tradition. Across the deserts of the Middle East and North Africa, Bedouin tribes followed the wind with camels and flocks. In Central Asia, Kazakh and Kyrgyz nomads moved with their herds, following grass and water. In East Africa, the Maasai roamed the savannas, their spears and cattle guiding their path. What all these people shared was a deep, almost spiritual relationship with the landscape. They didn't conquer it, they listened to it. They read it like a map. Every hill, every rock, every shift in the wind told them something. Where to camp, when to move, what to hunt, which grasses to graze. Their knowledge was ecological, not theoretic, learned by experience, not handed down in books. And yet, they were never truly rootless. Though they wandered, They belonged to roots, two seasons, two stories. Their identities were woven into the places they visited again and again, year after year. Each mountain pass, each watering hole, each grove of trees had a name, a memory, a meaning. They were part of a mental geography richer than any map, a web of invisible roots that stretched across continents. So why did the settled world look down on them? Why did empires call them barbarians? Because nomads challenged the very foundations of the state. They couldn't be taxed easily. They didn't respect borders. They moved through space the way birds do, fluidly, intuitively, without passports or permits. And that made them dangerous to rulers who wanted control. Throughout history, nomadic peoples have been admired for their resilience, but also feared for their unpredictability. To empires, they were raiders. To themselves, they were survivors. And yet, interactions between nomads and settlers were rarely black and white. Trade, marriage, warfare, diplomacy, these lines blurred constantly. The Silk Road itself, the most famous trade route in history, would not have existed without the nomads who ferried goods, guarded caravans, and guided merchants across dangerous terrain. They were not isolated. They were connectors. And this raises a deeper point. Nomads didn't just preserve old ways of life, they enabled the spread of new ones. Technologies, religions, languages, diseases all flowed along the paths that nomads traveled. They helped bind the ancient world together, even as they remained outside its cities. But in the modern age, the world began to change in ways that were profoundly hostile to nomadic life. Colonial powers drew borders on maps, straight lines that ignored ancient paths. National governments demanded ID papers, fixed addresses, permanent schools. Global agriculture carved up the land. Corporations bought the grasslands. Climate change dried up the wells. And slowly, the people of the wind were pushed to the margins. Villagized, sedentarized, forgotten. Many were told their way of life was backwards. That modernity meant planting roots literally and figuratively. Nomads became minorities, sometimes even criminals, accused of trespassing on land they had crossed for generations. But here's the irony. In the 21st century, as climate instability spreads, as droughts displace farmers and cities choke on pollution, the old ways may hold clues to our future survival. Because nomads were experts in low-impact living, their carbon footprint was almost nothing. Their societies were decentralized, egalitarian, resilient. They had no need for fossil fuels, skyscrapers, or industrial supply chains. Their wealth could walk. Their homes could be packed in an hour. They were prepared to move, to adapt, to change. In Mongolia, some herders now carry solar panels in their saddlebags, blending the old and the new. In northern Kenya, pastoralist communities are using mobile phones to trade livestock and track rainfall. Across the Arctic, reindeer herders like the AR using satellite data to find fresh grazing land. Technology, for some, has become an extension of the wind, a way to remain mobile in a world that increasingly resists motion. And that's the hidden genius of nomadism. It's not about endless wandering. It's about freedom with pattern, movement with memory. It's a form of intelligence we've almost forgotten: how to live lightly on the land, how to carry only what you need, how to adapt rather than dominate. So who are the people of the wind? They are not relics, they are reminders. That home is not always a building. That wealth is not always money. That permanence is not always security. They challenge us to ask, what would it mean to be truly free? Not free in a slogan, but free in motion. Free to follow the seasons, to live by the sky, to wake each morning and know your feet are your future. They are not gone. In pockets of Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe, nomadic communities still move, still breathe with the earth, still teach their children the way of the stars and wind. And as the world reels from the damage of overdevelopment, maybe it's time we stop calling them primitive and start calling them teachers. Today, when we think of lions, Our minds drift to the African savanna sun-scorched plains filled with tall grasses, gazelles, and prowling predators. We picture them as kings of Africa, symbols of power, pride, and dominance in the modern wilderness. But what if I told you that lions once ruled Europe? Not just in story or symbolism, but in flesh, fur, and fang. Yes, Europe, the land of castles, forests, and snowy mountains, was once home to lions. Real ones, massive, wild, and roaming free. And the world they lived in was a very different Europe than the one we know today. Rewind the clock back 10,000 to 40,000 years into the heart of the Pleistocene epoch. This was the Ice Age. Vast ice sheets loomed over much of northern Europe, while the southern regions leave the Balkans. The Iberian Peninsula were cooler, but not frozen. Forests gave way to steppes, and megafauna ruled the land. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, giant deer, and cave bears all shared the terrain with one of the top predators of the era, the Eurasian cave lion. Panthera spulea, as scientists call it, was no mere cousin of the African lioness, was larger, more muscular, and based on fossil reconstructions, even more formidable. Males likely lacked the full manes of their African relatives, perhaps an adaptation to the colder climate. But in every other way, they were apex predators, powerful, intelligent, and dominant. These cave lions weren't just footnotes in natural history. They were a central part of the ecosystem, shaping the behavior and evolution of the prey species around them. They hunted bison, reindeer, even young mammoths, echidnas. They competed with wolves, hyenas, and human hunters. And they left their mark not just in bones, but in art. Deep in caves across Europlasco in France, Chauvet in the Rhine Valley, and others, our ancestors drew them. Graceful, powerful lions with arched backs, stalking prey or facing one another in silent confrontations. These are not cartoonish sketches. They are masterpieces of observation, rendered in charcoal and ochre by people who had watched lions move, hunt, kill, howl. The images are haunting, graceful, and undeniably respectful. These lions weren't mythical creatures. They were neighbors. But how did lions end up in Europe in the first place? The answer lies in migration. During various interglacial periods when the climate warmed and ice retreated, animal species moved freely across Eurasia. Lions originating from Africa spread through the Middle East and into Europe, adapting to new climates and prey. This movement was not a one-time event. It happened over thousands of years, in waves, as climate and ecosystems allowed. And for a long time, the lions thrived. But like many megafauna, their fate was sealed by a combination of climate change and human expansion. As the Ice Age drew to a close around 10,000 years ago, forests began to replace the open steppes. The environment changed faster than many large species could adapt. Prey populations shifted, and humans armed with increasingly sophisticated tools and organized hunting strategies became formidable competitors. Lions were hunted not just for food or protection, but likely for prestige. Their pelts were prized, their presence feared and revered. And then, one day, they were gone. The Eurasian cave lion went extinct around 12,000 years ago, one of many victims in the late Pleistocene extinction event, which wiped out countless large mammals across the globe. It was the end of an era. Europe would never be the same, but not all lions disappeared. A close relative of the cave lion, the Asiatic lion, managed to survive in small numbers farther east in India and parts of the Middle East. Even in the classical world, lions roamed southern Europe. Greek myths are full of lion imagery: the Nemean lion that Heracles slayed, the lions that pulled goddesses' chariots. These were not just symbols, they were real animals, known to those societies, even if increasingly rare. The Romans kept lions in arenas. The Persians used them as royal emblems. Over time, lions faded from the wild and took root in the imagination. And that's the thing, lions never really left Europe. Not in our stories. Not in our symbols. Think about it. Lions appear on countless coats of arms, flags, and royal seals. They are the emblems of kings and conquerors: the Lion of England, the Lion of Venice, the Lion of Judah. Even though the people who designed these symbols likely never saw a living lion in their forests, the image persisted. Why? Because lions represented more than nature. They represented memory of a time when humans shared the land with something powerful, unpredictable, untamed. They reminded us that once Europe was wild. And perhaps deep down, we miss that wildness. Today, when we talk about rewilding Europe, we speak mostly of wolves, bison, lynxes. But what if we dared to remember that once lions were part of the European ecosystem? Not as zoo animals, not as myths, but as real, breathing creatures who shaped the continent's ecology for thousands of years. No one is suggesting we reintroduce lions to Europe. But the idea forces us to reconsider what we think is natural. Is it natural for Europe to be tame? For its forests to be quiet? For its landscapes to be free of apex predators? Or is that just recent history, a tiny sliver of time after millennia of wild coexistence? And what if the stories our ancestors told of beasts and battles, of lions in the hills, aren't just legends but echoes of reality? What if they're not just warnings of danger, but invitations to remember? In a cave in modern-day Germany, a small figurine was found, a creature with a human body and the head of a lion. Carved from mammoth ivory over 30,000 years ago, it's one of the oldest examples of sculpture ever discovered. Scholars call it the Lion Man of Hohenstein-Stadel. What does it mean? Is it a god, a spirit, a hunter's dream? No one knows for sure, but it proves this: lions were not just feared, they were venerated. They lived in our ancestors' imaginations just as vividly as they lived in the fields and forests. They were mirrors, metaphors, perhaps even messengers. Their extinction was not just ecological, it was spiritual. And so, when we tell the story of Europe's past, we must not forget the lions. Not just because they once walked there, but because they remind us that the world can be wilder than we imagine, and that we, too, were once part of that wildness. Lions once ruled Europe, and perhaps, in some hidden corner of the human heart, they still do. The Ice Age was not merciful. It carved continents, swallowed forests, drowned coastlines, and killed entire species without hesitation. Mammoths, saber-tooths, giant ground sloth creatures that had ruled the earth for tens of thousands of years vanished as the world thawed. But amid the ruins of that ancient epoch, some creatures endured. Not just physically, but culturally, spiritually, and ecologically. These were the survivors of the ice. Not every species perished when the Great Freeze receded. Some adapted, some fled. Some waited, hidden in forests, burrows, or ice caves, surviving just long enough to witness the world reborn. And among these unlikely survivors were animals so familiar today, we rarely stop to wonder how they got here. Let's start with a beast that should have died out long ago: the musk ox. Stocky, shaggy, and seemingly built from another era, musk oxen look like Ice Age relics because they are. They once shared tundra with woolly mammoths and saber-toothed cats, and somehow, against all odds, they're still with us. Their secret: extreme specialization. Musk oxen are walking fortresses. Their coats can trap heat in temperatures of -40 degrees Celsius, and their low, squat bodies reduce heat loss. They move slowly, graze efficiently, and defend themselves with a unity that would make military generals proud, circling their young. Horns out, daring predators to try. Then there's the reindeer, or caribou, another master of survival. Reindeer are the only deer species in which both males and females grow antlers, likely a result of harsh competition for food under deep snow. Their hooves change shape with the seasons, hardening in winter to cut through ice and softening in summer to tread muddy ground. And their noses, specially adapted to warm, icy air before it reaches their lungs. These animals didn't just survive the Ice Age, they became icons of the cold. But animals weren't the only survivors. Humans endured too. And perhaps the most astonishing story of survival belongs to the groups who refused to flee the cold, who instead learned to live inside it. In the high Arctic, in places where the sun vanishes for months and the wind slices like a blade, people not only endured, they thrived. The ancestors of the Inuit, the Chukchi, the Nenots, and other Arctic indigenous peoples developed techniques that were not just ingenious, they were expressions of deep ecological knowledge. They built homes of snow, perfectly insulated igloos that could raise interior temperatures by dozens of degrees. They fashioned tools from bone, lamps from whale fat, clothing from caribou and sealskin that was warmer than any modern synthetic. They hunted animals we'd consider impossible to find navigating vast white wastelands using memory, wind, and light alone. This was not primitive living. This was Ice Age engineering. Even more impressive was their understanding of balance. These cultures knew what modern societies often forget. Take too much, and the land dies. So they lived in cycles, migrated with the seasons, honored the animals they killed, shared meat across communities. Their survival wasn't just biological, it was cultural. And it left a mark. Artifacts from these Ice Age survivors can be found stretching across Siberia, Scandinavia, Greenland, and into North America. Their oral histories speak of a world now buried under sea, or forest places where mammoths still roamed and the stars shifted differently in the sky. But they weren't alone. In more temperate regions, other survivors endured as well. Wolves, for instance. Once hunted to the brink by humans, wolves were among the most successful predators of the Ice Age. They could hunt alone or in packs, adapt their diet, and move across vast distances. Their evolutionary adaptability is so successful, in fact, that their descendants, the domestic dog, would become humanity's closest companion. The dog is perhaps the ultimate Ice Age survivor. Domesticated likely during the Ice Age, dogs were first bred not for luxury, but for survival. They helped humans hunt, guarded camps, pulled sleds, and, in some cultures, warmed sleeping bodies through bitter nights. This was a partnership forged in hardship, two species helping each other against the cold, predators, and time. And just as animals adapted, so too did plants. Seeds, hibernating in the permafrost, waited for centuries to sprout again. In recent years, scientists have revived 30,000-year-old plant species from frozen Siberian seeds, proving that even the smallest of life forms found a way to endure the long, cold silence. But survival came at a cost. For every creature that made it, dozens did not. And those that remained were often pushed to the edge's marginal lands, mountains, remote islands. Wolves retreated to forests, reindeer to the tundra, musk oxen to the high Arctic, and humans? We spread, but the memory of the ice lingered. It lingered in our myths. Dragons that breathe cold. Monsters in the mountains. Endless winters in ancient tales. These aren't just metaphors. They're cultural fossils, imprints left by generations who lived through real, unimaginable cold. And even after the glaciers melted, the memory did not. We built rituals around the return of the sun. We feared the long nights. We learned that the earth can change faster than we can. And yet, the survivors remind us of something else. Resilience. That survival isn't always about strength. Often, it's about knowing when to move, when to rest, when to change. The creatures and cultures that survived the Ice Age didn't dominate. They adapted. They bent with the wind. They listened. They became part of the land, not rulers over it. And here's where their story touches ours. Because we, too, live in an age of change. The planet is warming. Ecosystems are shifting. Seas are rising. And once again, species including our own face hard decisions. Migrate or stay. Adapt or perish. Fight the earth or learn from it. The survivors of the ice left us a roadmap. Not in textbooks, but in bones, fur, myths, and footprints. They showed us how to endure without breaking. how to respect the balance, how to honor the past without becoming trapped in it. Today, we still walk among them. Every time we see a dog, every time a reindeer crosses a snowfield, every time an Arctic hunter takes a seal with ancient patience, we are watching a 40,000-year-old wisdom still alive in the veins of the earth. And maybe, just maybe, if we remember how they survived the last great change, we might survive the next. The glaciers melted, the mammoths fell. Forests crept across the plains where woolly rhinoceroses once roamed. Rivers swelled with thaw, carving new paths through newly exposed land. Coastlines shifted. Sea levels rose. And when the Ice Age finally ended, Earth looked nothing like it had before. The world had changed, but it was not dead. It was reborn. In the wake of destruction came creation. The scars left by the glacier's deep valleys, U-shaped fjords, freshwater lakes became the cradles of new ecosystems. Ancient riverbeds filled with fish. Alpine slopes teemed with grasses and flowers. Insects buzzed in forests that had once been frozen for tens of millennia. It was as if the earth exhaled for the first time in 100,000 years. And life surged into the open spaces. This new world didn't just emerge by chance. It was sculpted by the very events that nearly extinguished it. The melting ice sheets, which had towered kilometers high, dumped unimaginable volumes of water back into the ocean. Sea levels rose over 400 feet, drowning entire land bridges like the famous Beringia, which once connected Siberia to Alaska. With its disappearance, populations of animals and people were isolated, creating new evolutionary experiments across continents. One of the most dramatic of these was the spread of forests. What had once been mammoth steppenless expanses of grasses and sedges was now being overtaken by birch, pine, and oak. Trees had waited on the edges of the ice for their moment, and now they swept in like armies. This new wooded world changed everything. For animals, the change meant migration, adaptation, or extinction. Some thrived. Elk and red deer filled the new forests. Beavers, long absent from the landscape, built dams and reshaped waterways. Birds diversified rapidly, taking advantage of the new insect-rich environments. Fish surged into lakes, newly filled with glacial melt. Others were not so lucky. The large herbivores of the open plains mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant deer, could not adapt to forested life. Their decline was already in motion, worsened by human hunting, but now the ecosystem itself turned against them. The food they needed vanished. The ground they needed to roam shrank. Within a few thousand years, most of them were gone. But in their place came something new: biodiversity on a massive scale. With the harshest constraints lifted, species radiated outward like sparks from a fire. From insects to amphibians, mammals to birds. This post-ice age world became a canvas of experimentation, evolution moving at incredible speed. Europe alone became a patchwork of ecosystems, from Mediterranean coasts to alpine heights, Scandinavian forests to British wetlands. And amid all this movement, one species rose above the rest, not in strength or speed, but in adaptability. Humans. The end of the Ice Age marked a turning point for Homo sapiens. With stable climates and predictable seasons came agriculture. We settled near rivers that flowed with glacial water. We cultivated the grains that once grew wild on the Mammoth Plains. We domesticated animals that had once wandered free. This new earth allowed us to finally anchor. But that anchoring came at a price. We cleared forests to make room for crops. We dammed rivers, tamed animals, mined hills. We built civilizations first small, then sprawling. Cities rose on the bones of megafauna. And soon, we became the dominant shaper of the post-Ice Age world. Yet something ancient still clung to us. A memory. A memory of movement, of watching the stars, of hunting, of huddling for warmth, of fearing the cold but loving the land. This memory lived in myths, in rituals, in seasonal festivals. It lived in the layout of our towns, the shapes of our tools, even the way we told stories around fire. The Ice Age was over, but it echoed, and it still echoes today. Because the story of a world reborn is not just about nature, it's about what we do with second chances. In the last 2 centuries, we've altered the Earth faster than any glacier ever could. We've warmed the planet, reshaped coastlines, and triggered what many scientists now call the 6th mass extinction. But the Ice Age survivors taught us a powerful truth. Resilience is possible. Life rebounds. New ecosystems can emerge. Extinctions end some stories, but they also begin others. The key is this: will we let the next rebirth happen naturally, or must it be forced? Already, we are seeing nature reclaim what was lost. In areas where agriculture has ceased, rewilding efforts are allowing forests, bison, wolves, and birds to return. Rivers are being freed from dams. Old grasslands are being restored. And with climate change accelerating, we're realizing that some of the solutions may lie in the past. Think about it. The mammoth steppe kept the permafrost frozen. The dense herds of grazers cycled nutrients and carbon. The forests that replace them store vast amounts of sea. Nature, when left alone or wisely guided, can stabilize the climate far better than any machine. But we must act with humility. The Ice Age ended slowly, over thousands of years. Our current age is changing far faster. Species have no time to adapt. Habitats have no time to reform. If we want a rebirth, it can't be passive. It must be intentional. And it must begin with remembering what this planet has already survived. Earth has been through fire and ice, flood and famine, extinction and explosion. And every time it has found a way to recover, not by going backward, but by evolving forward. We stand now at another threshold. The glaciers will not return, but the lessons remain. From the mammoth's bones to the cave paintings of Chauvet, from the footprints of children in ancient mud to the genomes of Ice Age seeds now sprouting in labs, the Earth has been whispering its story, not of doom, but of cycles, renewal, rebirth. And if we really listen, we might find a path not just to survival, but to a better way of living. A way that honors the past, adapts to the present, and protects the possibility of a future. Because in the end, the Ice Age didn't destroy the Earth, it transformed it. And in its shadow, we were born.